She was a billionaire. He was nobody. And in 30 seconds, a stranger's kindness destroyed everything she thought she knew about men. The cafe went silent the moment Marcus Hale pushed back his chair, loud enough to turn every head in the room. He looked at Victoria Sterling, worth $4 billion, dressed in a coat that cost more than most people's cars, and said the words that would echo in her chest for months afterward. "I don't date mothers. Kids are baggage I'm not willing to carry." The whole room heard it, including the 5-year-old sitting right beside her. If this story moves you, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this has traveled. Hit like and stay until the very end. This one's worth it. The rain started around 6. Not the romantic kind that softens city lights and makes people want to stay inside with someone warm. This was November rain. Cold, irritable, the kind that gets inside your collar no matter how you hold your umbrella. The kind that makes the whole city feel like it's running late for something it already missed. Victoria Sterling sat in the back of her black SUV and watched the water streak down the window, each drop moving sideways before it gave up and fell. Her phone had buzzed 11 times in the last 40 minutes. She hadn't answered any of them. "Mommy, are we there yet?" "Almost, baby." Lily was buckled into the seat beside her, wearing a purple sweater with a small embroidered star on the chest that she'd picked out herself 3 weeks ago and had not voluntarily removed since. She was 5 years old, and she had opinions about clothing. She also had opinions about restaurants, bedtime, which side of the sidewalk to walk on, and whether or not scrambled eggs counted as real food. She was in almost every measurable way the most difficult and most important person in Victoria's life. "Who are we eating dinner with?" "A friend." "Is he nice?" Victoria looked at her daughter's face. Lily had her father's eyes, dark and wide set, but the rest of her was purely Victoria's, the stubborn set of the jaw, the way she tilted her head slightly when she was skeptical of something. She was skeptical now. "I don't know yet," Victoria said honestly. Lily considered this. "You should find out before dinner." "That's what dinner is for." "That seems like a lot of work." Victoria almost smiled. "Yeah, it is." She turned back to the window. The truth was that she hadn't wanted to come tonight. She hadn't wanted to come last week either, when her assistant Priya had first floated the idea, her voice careful and diplomatic, the way it got when she was about to suggest something she expected Victoria to refuse. "I know you're not looking for anything," Priya had said, "but Marcus Hale he's good. He came recommended by 3 people. He's a partner at Behringer Financial. He's been through his own complicated history, so he's not someone who judges." Not someone who judges? That was the part that had made Victoria pause. Because the truth, the part she didn't say out loud to anyone, not even Priya, who had worked for her for 6 years and knew more about her life than most people, was that she was tired. Bone tired in a way that had nothing to do with her schedule or her company's quarterly earnings or the 14-hour days she sometimes put in when a deal was closing. She was tired of being alone in a way she didn't have language for. Tired of handling everything herself, all of it, the household and the daughter and the board meetings, and the loneliness that sat on the other side of every night after Lily fell asleep. So she had said yes. And now here she was, arriving at a restaurant she'd chosen precisely because it was not somewhere people like her usually went. A small cafe in the Westfield district, warm-lit and unpretentious, with mismatched chairs and handwritten menu boards. Somewhere she could sit and not be watched. Somewhere she could just be a woman having dinner. She had not brought security. She had brought her daughter. Lily was the only person in the world Victoria Sterling trusted unconditionally, without reservation, without fear of what that trust might eventually cost her. The cafe smelled like coffee and baked bread and something cinnamon-adjacent that Lily immediately identified and cataloged. "Snickerdoodles," Lily said, with the certainty of a wine sommelier. "Definitely snickerdoodles." "We're here for dinner." "Cookies can be dinner." "They cannot." In some cultures, Lily, her daughter sighed the sigh of someone deeply misunderstood, and Victoria squeezed her hand once as they stepped inside. The place was maybe half full. A couple near the window sharing a slice of something chocolate. A group of women around a long table in the back, loud and laughing. A man sitting alone at the counter with a cup of coffee and his phone face down on the bar, which struck Victoria as oddly deliberate. like he'd made a choice not to be distracted. She scanned the room for Marcus Hale. He was already there, at a corner table near the fireplace, mid-30s, well-dressed in the way that suggested he'd thought about it, with the kind of square-jawed good looks that photographed well and said nothing particularly interesting about a person. He stood when he saw her, and something in his expression shifted. Calculation, quick and subtle, the kind of assessment people made when they thought they were being subtle and weren't. He hadn't known about Lily. She could see it in the half-second of blankness before his smile reconstructed itself. Priya had told him. Victoria had confirmed it herself in the preliminary message exchange. "I have a daughter. I want to be clear about that up front. She'll be with me tonight." She'd been clear. Deliberately, carefully clear. But there was knowing and there was knowing. She kept her face neutral and walked toward him, Lily's hand in hers. "Marcus, hi. I'm Victoria." She extended her free hand. "And this is Lily." "Hey there," Marcus said, looking at Lily the way some adults looked at children they didn't particularly like. A kind of performed warmth that landed flat. Lily stared at him. She had not yet developed the social reflex that prompted people to pretend. They sat. Victoria settled Lily beside her, pulled out a small book from her bag. Lily's current obsession was anything involving horses, and set it on the table in front of her daughter. It bought them approximately 7 minutes of silence, in her experience. Possibly 12, if there were pictures. "She's beautiful," Marcus said. His tone was the right tone. His eyes weren't quite matching it. "Thank you," Victoria said. "So, Priya tells me you work at Behringer, corporate restructuring?" "Mergers, primarily. We handled the Hennessy deal last spring. You probably saw that." "I did. My company has some overlap with their Pacific division." "Sterling Acquisitions, right?" His posture shifted slightly. "I did some reading. Impressive portfolio." "Of course you did." "It keeps me busy." The conversation moved the way first conversations moved. Surface, 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 with occasional dips towards something that might become real and then pulling back. He was smart. She'd grant him that. He knew the right things to say about work and travel and a recent trip to Barcelona. He had opinions about architecture. He asked questions that sounded interested. But Lily kept appearing at the edges of his attention like something inconvenient. Every time her daughter shifted in her seat or asked a quiet question or held up the book to show Victoria a picture of a particularly magnificent-looking Andalusian, something moved behind Marcus Hale's eyes. Something he wasn't quite hiding. Victoria recognized that look. She'd seen it before. She ordered the salmon. Lily ordered pancakes because dinner menus were, in Lily's philosophical framework, a type of suggestion rather than a rule. Marcus ordered the steak. The food arrived. The conversation continued. Victoria kept one hand near Lily's elbow the way she always did in restaurants. A silent anchor, barely conscious. Lily ate 3 bites of pancake, declared herself finished, and began drawing small horses in the margins of her book with a purple crayon she'd produced from somewhere inside her sweater. Then Marcus set down his fork. It was a deliberate gesture, the kind of gesture that preceded something. "Can I be honest with you?" he said. Victoria had been in enough boardrooms to know that sentence never preceded anything good. "Go ahead." "You're exactly what I expected," he said. "Smart, accomplished, clearly someone who knows what she wants." He glanced at Lily, back at Victoria. "But I didn't expect this." "I told you I had a daughter." "You did." A pause. "I guess I thought, I don't know what I thought, that it would feel different." He said it like it was an explanation rather than an insult, like she should understand. "The truth is, I'm at a stage in my life where I'm looking for something uncomplicated, and this," he gestured vaguely at the space between Victoria and Lily, "this is complicated." Victoria kept her face still. It was a skill she'd cultivated over years. In rooms full of men who expected her to flinch, she had learned not to flinch. "I see," she said. "It's nothing against you personally. You're clearly—" "Marcus," her voice was quiet and even. "You don't need to keep talking." He stopped, had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "I just think it's better to be upfront. You've been upfront." She picked up her glass of water, set it down. "I appreciate clarity." She thought that might be the end of it. She thought he would signal for the check and they would part ways with a minimum of further damage. And she would take Lily home and put her to bed and sit by herself in her kitchen for a while with a cup of tea and let herself feel whatever she was going to feel privately, in the dark, where it didn't belong to anyone. But Marcus Hale wasn't finished. He pushed his chair back. The legs scraped against the wood floor. That sound, that particular ugly sound. And then he said it. "I don't date mothers. Kids are baggage I'm not willing to carry." He said it at a volume that was not quite public, but not quite private either. The couple near the window heard it. The waitress passing behind him heard it. The man at the counter with his phone face down heard it. The cafe went quiet, in the specific way that spaces go quiet, when something happens that everyone present immediately understands is wrong. Victoria heard a small intake of breath beside her. She turned. Lily was looking up at Marcus Hale. Her purple crayon had stopped moving. Her dark eyes were wide and very still, the way they got when she was trying to process something that didn't quite make sense to her yet. "Mommy?" Her voice was small, careful. "Am I baggage?" The words arrived in Victoria's chest like something physical, like a pressure behind the sternum. She had felt pain before, real pain, the kind that reshaped you, and she knew how to carry it without showing it on her face. She had learned that in the years of her marriage, and in the hospital 3 days after Lily was born, when the doctor had sat across from her and used the word postpartum, but had clearly meant something much more frightening. And in the courtroom 2 years ago, when Damien's lawyers had stood and said things about her fitness as a mother that still woke her up sometimes at 3 in the morning. She knew how to absorb pain silently. But looking at her daughter's face, 5 years old, holding a purple crayon, sincerely asking whether she was baggage, Victoria didn't trust herself to speak. "Baby," she started. "Lily." Her voice came out wrong, too tight. Nathan Reed had been sitting at the counter for 40 minutes, and he had no particular reason to still be there. The coffee was fine. He'd finished it 20 minutes ago. He'd ordered a second cup mostly to give himself permission to keep sitting, which was something he'd been doing a lot lately. Finding reasons to not go home to a house that had gotten very quiet since Emma started kindergarten, and very, very quiet since Amy died. 3 years since Amy. You'd think, people told him he'd think, that it got easier. And in some ways that was technically accurate. He no longer forgot, on waking, that she was gone. He no longer reached for his phone to text her something funny before remembering. The acute phase of grief had settled into something more chronic, more manageable, less like drowning, and more like a low-grade weather condition he carried around. But the house was still quiet. He'd come to this cafe for no particular reason. He'd been driving past it on the way back from a job site in the Westfield district, a residential renovation that was 2 weeks behind schedule because of a subcontractor problem he'd been unsuccessfully solving for the better part of November. And the light coming through the cafe windows had looked warm in a way that his empty house wouldn't. So he'd parked and come in and ordered coffee and sat at the counter and thought about the subcontractor problem and tried not to think about the fact that Emma was with her grandmother for the weekend and the house was going to be particularly quiet, in a way it only got when she wasn't there. He wasn't eavesdropping on the couple in the corner. He wasn't trying to. But the cafe was small, and the sound of a chair scraping was the kind of sound that pulled your attention involuntarily, and then the man's voice, not yelling, but carrying, and then the words, "Kids are baggage I'm not willing to carry." Nathan looked up. He saw the woman first, composed, controlled, the kind of stillness that was clearly costing her something. He saw the man already half standing, doing that particular thing men did when they wanted to leave a situation they'd created but didn't want to be seen fleeing it. And then he saw the little girl. She was maybe 5, maybe 6, purple sweater with something embroidered on it, dark eyes. And she was looking at her mother with a question on her face that Nathan recognized. Not the words, but the shape of the question. The shape a kid's face makes when the world has just said something that doesn't fit with how they understood the world to work. And they're trying to reconcile it, and they don't yet have the emotional vocabulary to understand that some things can't be reconciled. Am I baggage? Nathan put his coffee cup down. He watched the man in the suit straighten his jacket and move toward the door with the brisk confidence of someone who had decided the situation was resolved. He watched the woman at the table pull herself back together, visibly, like watching someone rebuild a wall brick by brick. He sat for another 30 seconds. He was not a person who inserted himself into things. He'd built his entire adult life on the principle of minding his own business, doing his work, coming home to his daughter, fixing what he could fix, and leaving alone what he couldn't. He was 32 years old, and he ran a 9-person construction company, and he paid his taxes and showed up to Emma's school events, even when they were scheduled in the middle of workdays, and he did not get involved in strangers' problems in cafes. He picked up his coffee cup, found it empty, set it back down. The little girl's face was still doing the thing, the question still living in it, unanswered. Nathan stood up. He pulled 2 tens from his wallet, left them under the coffee cup, and walked across the cafe to the corner table. The woman looked up when he stopped beside the table. Her expression was carefully neutral. The face of someone who had been caught in a moment they hadn't chosen and was now bracing for whatever came next. He didn't have a plan. He hadn't thought out what to say. He just looked at her and then at the little girl and said the only thing that seemed true. "I'm sorry, that was a rotten thing to say, both of you." He paused. "Can I sit with you too?" Victoria's first instinct was to say no. Her first instinct, in almost every situation involving a stranger in any degree of vulnerability, was to say no. It was a reflex that had served her well for the better part of a decade. The world, in her experience, was not short of men who mistook proximity to wealth or loneliness or visible emotion as an invitation. But there was something about the way he'd said it. Not, "Can I help?" which would have carried the complicated freight of pity. Not, "Are you okay?" which would have forced her to perform okayness for a stranger. Just, "Can I sit with you too?" Like the question was actually about Lily, like he'd looked at the little girl first. She looked at him properly. He was not what she would have expected from that question, which was vague in her mind, but he was solid. That was the word. Broad-shouldered, wearing a jacket that had seen actual weather, with hands that looked like they'd done actual work. Not polished, not performing anything. Brown eyes that looked tired in a way that seemed structural rather than situational, like he carried a specific weight that had become so familiar he'd stopped noticing it. He was waiting, quietly, not pressing. Lily was looking at him too. The question had not left her face entirely, but something in it had shifted. She'd redirected her curiosity, the way children do, onto this new variable. "You have nice boots," Lily said. The man looked down at his work boots, back up at Lily. His mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile but was close to the origin of one. "Thanks. They're good for winter." "Are they waterproof?" "Pretty much." "My boots leak," Lily said gravely. "Mommy said we'd get new ones." "Lily," Victoria said. "We will," she added, to Nathan, in the tone of someone who needed it on the record. Nathan looked at Victoria. "Only if you want company. I'm not trying to... I just thought..." He stopped, tried again. "It seemed like you'd had enough of people tonight, but the other kind. I can go." He said the last part without any particular attachment to the outcome. Like he genuinely meant it, like he wasn't angling for anything. She heard herself say, "Sit down." He sat. Not across from her, beside Lily, which put him at the corner of the table, an angle that felt less confrontational. He looked at the menu board above the counter, and then at the remains of Lily's pancakes, and then at Victoria's half-eaten salmon. "I'm Nathan, by the way." "Victoria." "I know." He said it without any inflection, at her raised eyebrow. "There was a profile in the business section about 6 months ago. Sterling Acquisitions, Pacific Expansion. I work in construction. We track development news." She hadn't expected that. "You do your homework." Occupational habit. He caught the waitress's eye and ordered coffee. Simple, no modification. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know who you are, but I don't have any interest in whatever the recognition is supposed to mean." He seemed to consider whether that had come out right. That probably sounded weird. "It sounded honest," Victoria said. "Weird and honest aren't mutually exclusive." A beat. Then Lily, who had been listening with the focused attention of a much older person, said, "Are you married?" Lily, "It's fine," Nathan said. He looked at Lily directly, which struck Victoria because most adults talked slightly over children's heads, at the parents, as though the child were furniture that might need maintenance later. He looked at Lily like she'd asked a real question. I was. My wife died 3 years ago. Lily received this with the solemnity it deserved. I don't have a daddy, she said. He lives somewhere else. I've got a daughter about your age, Nathan said. She's with her grandma this weekend. Lily considered this data. What's her name? Emma? Does she like horses? More into dinosaurs, actually. Lily made a sound that suggested she found this choice understandable but suboptimal. Horses are better. I'll let her know. Victoria had stopped tracking the conversation as information and was just listening, the way she sometimes listened to rain. There was something about the way he was with Lily that didn't perform itself. It wasn't the kind of careful, deliberate warmth that adults deployed around children when they wanted to be liked, or the slightly overcorrected kindness of people who didn't have much experience with kids and were worried about getting it wrong. He was just present, talking to her the way you talk to someone. She picked up her fork, found she was, surprisingly, hungry again. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly, while Lily had returned to her horse drawings. Come over. I know. Why did you? He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup, looked at it for a second. My daughter asked me once why some people were mean to other people. She was 4. I didn't have a good answer. He looked up. I hate it when I don't have a good answer. They stayed for another hour and 20 minutes. Victoria wouldn't have predicted that, wouldn't have predicted any of it, the ease of it, the particular relief of sitting with someone who wasn't assessing her, wasn't cataloging her net worth or her influence or her family situation in terms of what it offered or cost him. Nathan Reed talked about his work with the matter-of-fact brevity of someone who liked it without needing to convince anyone of its importance. A residential renovation in Westfield, a commercial project in the spring, a subcontractor issue that had been driving him up a wall for 2 weeks. He talked about Emma the way Victoria talked about Lily, not performing parenthood, just describing it, the way you described weather or geography, something real that shaped your daily life. He asked about her work with what seemed like genuine curiosity rather than networking strategy. He listened when she answered. He disagreed with her, mildly, about a policy question related to urban development, and he didn't immediately backpedal when she pushed back. He just said, maybe, but here's the thing, and made his case, and she found herself actually thinking about it rather than managing the conversation. Nobody had made her think about something in a while. They mostly just agreed with her, or they didn't listen, or they were waiting for their turn to talk about themselves. Lily fell asleep somewhere around the 80-minute mark, listing sideways against Victoria's arm with the absolute abandon of a child who had decided the situation was safe. Victoria moved her arm so Lily could rest more comfortably, and noticed Nathan watching this with an expression she couldn't quite read. She does that, Victoria said. Decides somewhere is safe and just goes. Emma's the same. A pause. She's a good judge, actually, better than most adults. Children generally are. She looked down at Lily's sleeping face, the star on the purple sweater rising and falling with her breathing. They don't have reasons to pretend yet. No. He was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, what that guy said. He was wrong. She looked up. I know you don't need me to tell you that, he said. You clearly know that. But sometimes it helps to hear it from someone who doesn't have anything to gain from saying it. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. She's not baggage. She's the main thing. Anyone who can't see that... He stopped. Anyway, Victoria didn't say anything. She had spent a significant portion of the last 5 years armoring herself against exactly this, against feeling something from a simple sentence said by a stranger. She had built the armor carefully and reinforced it strategically, and she was, in her own assessment, quite good at wearing it. She was aware that the armor was currently not doing its job. I should get her home, she said finally. Yeah. He flagged the waitress for the check. You really don't need to... I asked to sit at your table, he said simply. That makes it my bill. It was objectively a small thing. It was also the kind of small thing that people said and then made complicated, well, but she's got more money than, or I'm just being fair. Or any of the dozen ways people turned a simple gesture into a transaction that left you owing something. He just paid it, signed the slip, helped her into her coat without being asked and without making a production of it. She had Lily against her shoulder, still sleeping, the purple sweater warm under her chin. At the door, he held it open. The rain had stopped. The sidewalk was wet and reflective, and the streetlights made everything look like a photograph. "Thank you," Victoria said, "for all of this." "Don't thank me," Nathan said. "It was good company." He looked at Lily's sleeping face briefly. "Both of you." He said goodnight. He walked toward a pickup truck parked half a block down, hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders slightly hunched against the cold. Victoria stood on the sidewalk with her sleeping daughter and watched him go. She didn't know his last name. She had his first name in the name of his company, from the brief mention of it earlier, and the fact that he had a daughter named Emma who preferred dinosaurs to horses, which Lily, when she woke up, would likely want to debate. She didn't know anything else. She found herself wanting to. That was new. That specific feeling, not the comfortable theoretical wanting of a life that was different, but the actual present tense wanting of a specific thing. A specific person's presence. The sound of someone not performing anything. The way he'd looked at Lily like she was a real person who had asked a real question, not a complication to be managed. She adjusted Lily's weight on her shoulder and walked toward where her driver was waiting. The cafe light was warm behind her. Inside, through the window, she could see their table, the remains of dinner, a purple crayon left on the tablecloth, the coffee cups. The same table where, 40 minutes ago, she'd been told her daughter was baggage. She didn't know, standing on that sidewalk, that she would go back to that table a year from now. Didn't know what would be waiting for her there. She just knew that tonight, something had shifted. Not fixed, not resolved, just shifted. Like a weight redistributed. Like the beginning of a change in weather that you feel in your joints before you can name it. She got in the car. Lily stirred, pressed her face against Victoria's neck. "Mommy?" she murmured, still mostly asleep. "The man with the good boots?" "Yeah, baby." "He was nice." "Yeah." Victoria looked out the window at the city passing by, wet and lit and indifferent and full of strangers. He was. She didn't reach out first. That mattered to her in a way she couldn't entirely rationalize. Victoria Sterling had built a company by moving first, by identifying opportunity before it was obvious, by picking up the phone before the other person knew there was a call to be made. She was not, by temperament or by practice, someone who waited. But she waited. She told herself it was because she had nothing concrete to reach out about. She didn't have his number. She had his name and the name of his company, Reed Construction, and the vague Westfield district, and the fact that his daughter preferred dinosaurs. That was it. She could find him in approximately 4 minutes if she wanted to, and she knew it, and she didn't do it. And she told herself that was because she wasn't going to use the resources available to a person of her position to locate a man she'd met once in a cafe. She told herself that for 11 days. On the 12th day, Priya knocked on her office door and said, "There's a Nathan Reed on hold for you. He says you met at a cafe in the Westfield district last month. Should I—" "Put him through," Victoria said, before Priya had finished the sentence. She waited 2 seconds after Priya closed the door. Picked up the phone. "This is Victoria Sterling." "Hi." A pause. "This is Nathan Reed. I sat down at your table uninvited about 2 weeks ago." "I remember." "Right." Another pause. She could hear something in the background. The particular sounds of a job site, intermittent and industrial. "I'm going to be honest with you because I find it's generally more efficient. I've been trying to think of a professional reason to call you, and I can't come up with one that isn't obviously manufactured. So I'm going to skip that part and just say, I'd like to have coffee with you, if that's something you'd want." Victoria looked at her desk, the stack of quarterly reports waiting for her attention, the meeting agenda for 2 o'clock. Her life, organized and scheduled and functioning, every hour accounted for. "My daughter would want to know if Emma has made any progress on the horse question," she said. A beat. Then something in his voice that wasn't quite a laugh but was adjacent to one. "She's holding firm on dinosaurs. but she's open to a full debate on the subject if someone wants to make the case. Lily will want to do that in person. Is that a yes? That's a yes, Victoria said. She hung up and sat for a moment with her hand still on the receiver, aware that she was doing a thing she hadn't done in a long time, which was feeling something in the direction of forward rather than just enduring the present. It was a small thing. She didn't make it into more than it was, but it was a thing. They met on a Thursday morning at a different cafe, smaller and less self-conscious than the first one. A neighborhood place near Victoria's office that had excellent espresso and uncomfortable chairs, and a bulletin board near the door covered in lost pet flyers and local band posters. Nathan arrived 3 minutes late and said so directly, without excessive apology, because there'd been a problem at the Westfield site and he'd had to make a call. Victoria appreciated the directness. She'd spent enough of her adult life on the receiving end of elaborate excuses that were actually justifications, and this was neither. They talked for an hour and a half. She had a meeting at 10 and she moved it to 11, which was something she did approximately twice a year and which Priya, when informed, said nothing about, in the particular way she said nothing when she was actively choosing not to say something. The conversation was not romantic exactly. That wasn't the right word for it. It was more like the specific relief of talking to someone whose interest in you was not dependent on anything you could give them. Nathan Reed did not need her connections, or her capital, or her industry access, or her name in a room. He ran a 9-person construction company that was doing well enough, in his words, meaning it paid its people on time and kept him busy. And he had no apparent ambition to leverage their conversation into anything. He asked her about the Pacific expansion in a way that was curious rather than strategic. She found herself explaining it in terms she didn't usually use with people outside the company. Not the polished investor relations version, but the actual version. The one that included the parts that were frustrating and uncertain and harder than she'd initially estimated. Why the Pacific specifically? He asked. Because everyone said not to go there yet, she said. The market timing isn't conventional, but I've built most of this company by moving when the timing isn't conventional. That's either extremely smart or you just enjoy being difficult. Usually both, she said. He smiled at that. A real smile, the kind that happened to his face rather than being placed on it. It changed the arrangement of things. She filed that away without examining it. He told her about the Westfield renovation, a pre-war house that the owners wanted modernized without losing the original bones of the place, which was, in his description, approximately the most infuriating kind of project, because it required restraint at every stage, and restraint was not something his clients consistently understood they were asking for. They wanted to feel like the 1920s and function like 2024, he said. Which is fine. That's a real thing you can actually do, but then they also want to open up the kitchen and move the staircase, and you can't do both of those things and keep the original bones. You have to choose. What did they choose? They're still choosing. Week 4 of choosing. He drank his coffee. Construction is about 50% building things and 50% helping people understand what they actually want versus what they said they want. Victoria recognized something in that. That's also acquisitions. How so? People say they want a partnership. What they usually want is capital without accountability. She set her cup down. The negotiation is figuring out the gap between those two things and whether you can close it. He looked at her with what she was beginning to recognize as his thinking expression. A slight stillness, not blank but focused, like he was actually processing what she'd said rather than queuing up his response. You enjoy that? The negotiation? I'm good at it. Enjoying it is a different question. Most people don't separate those. Most people can't afford to. A beat. He nodded slowly, not in agreement exactly, but in the way people nodded when they heard something they intended to keep thinking about. She left at 10:47. He walked out with her, and they stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the weak December sun, and he said he'd call her if that was still all right. She said it was. He didn't say anything else elaborate or reaching, didn't try to extend the moment past its natural end, which she noticed because it was rarer than it should have been. She walked back to her office and sat down at her desk and looked at the quarterly reports and thought, for approximately 90 seconds, about nothing work-related at all. Then she picked up the reports, because she had a company to run. But the 90 seconds were real. But December became January. The way December always became January, with too much noise and then sudden silence, the holidays swallowing everything and then releasing it abruptly into the cold, gray start of a new year. Victoria spent Christmas in her mother's house in Connecticut, 4 days of organized chaos that she both dreaded and needed. Lily overwhelmed and gleeful with cousins and wrapping paper and a toy horse she'd specifically requested and received and immediately named Gerald. Nathan spent Christmas with Emma and his late wife's parents, which he mentioned once, briefly, and she understood from the way he mentioned it that it was both necessary and hard. That particular kind of grief maintenance that required showing up to the places where someone had been, because not showing up would mean something irrevocable. They texted through the holidays. Not constantly, not in the relentless way that suggested anxiety or performance. Just occasionally, a photo Nathan sent of Emma's face when she unwrapped a massive T-Rex model, followed by a voice memo of Lily's response when Victoria showed her the photo, which was a 30-second monologue on the many advantages of horses over extinct animals. Victoria listened to herself laughing at that voice memo and thought, when is the last time I laughed like that without deciding to? She didn't have an answer. That was the answer. January brought cold and work and the beginning of something that neither of them were calling anything yet. They had coffee 3 more times, always during the day, always with concrete end times, always in places that were clearly casual, no implicit pressure. He met Lily for the second time in the lobby of Victoria's building when he came to drop off a set of architectural references she'd asked to look at for a potential acquisition project. Lily appeared from nowhere, the way she did, in the star sweater. She had now worn it so many times Victoria had quietly bought an identical backup, and looked at Nathan with the critical assessment of a customs officer. "Did you talk to Emma about horses?" she demanded. Nathan regarded her seriously. "She's reconsidering her position. She should." "I'll let her know you said so." Lily nodded, satisfied, and disappeared back toward the playroom where her nanny was waiting with considerably less patience than was being shown. Victoria watched this exchange with something she refused to name. "She's going to be terrifying when she's 40, Nathan said. "She's already terrifying. I just love her, so I find it charming." He smiled at that, and then he handed her the architectural references and said he had to get back to a site, and he left. Simple. No maneuvering, no lingering on the threshold of something else. She kept finding herself grateful for that, and then she kept finding herself in the same breath slightly unnerved by the gratitude, because since when was the absence of pressure something she felt she had to be grateful for? Since when was basic decency something she cataloged as a distinguishing feature? Since Damien, she supposed. Since the marriage that had cost her more than she'd budgeted for, in ways she hadn't known to account for. But she didn't want to spend time on that. She'd spent enough time on that already. February was when it shifted. Not dramatically. Nothing between them shifted dramatically. That was part of what made it disorienting, actually, because Victoria was accustomed to dramatic. She was accustomed to negotiations that broke down and reformed, to relationships with clear inflection points you could point to and say, there. That's when it changed. That's when I knew. This didn't work like that. It worked like, one Saturday in early February, Nathan called and said Emma had a half day, and he was taking her to the Natural History Museum, and would Lily want to come, if Victoria wasn't doing anything. Victoria's first instinct was to check her schedule, which was clear, and then to think of a reason to introduce slowness, some buffer between this easy present moment and whatever came after it. She didn't introduce the buffer. "We'll meet you there," she said. The Natural History Museum in February was not crowded. They had a weekend membership. She'd bought it for Lily 2 years ago, and they'd used it maybe 5 times. And Nathan paid for his and Emma's admission at the door with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who'd already decided the question of who paid for what wasn't going to be complicated. Emma was 7, which was 2 years older than Lily, and roughly twice as tall, with her father's brown eyes and her own particular energy, which was focused and enthusiastic and very specifically directed toward anything prehistoric. She went directly for the dinosaur hall with the purpose of someone who had a detailed personal agenda, and Lily, rather than feel left behind by this expertise gap, appeared to regard it as a learning opportunity and fell into step beside her, pelting her with questions about bone structure and extinction events, with the curiosity of someone who suspected they'd been missing important information. Nathan and Victoria followed at parent pace, 3 steps behind. "She's going to have Lily converted by the end of the day," Nathan said. "Don't be so sure. Lily has strong opinions. Emma's committed. She's been into this since she was 4. She's got staying power." Lily named her horse Gerald. Emma named her T-Rex Dr. Margaret. A beat. "Okay," Victoria said. "Your kid might be something special." He laughed. Actually laughed. Not the polite variety, but the kind that surprised him slightly, like he hadn't expected to. She found she liked that. The way his face did something unguarded when something genuinely struck him as funny. They walked through the exhibits and talked about the things adults talked about when they were pretending they were just there for the children. The construction project, a board situation she was navigating, Emma's school, Lily's recently developed philosophy that socks were optional in all seasons. Small things. The kind of conversation that was unremarkable in its content and notable in its comfort. At one point, Lily tripped over her own feet on the steps between 2 halls and grabbed the nearest available hand without looking, which happened to be Nathan's. He caught her, steadied her, kept walking. Lily didn't release his hand immediately. She held it for another 20 or 30 steps, looking at the exhibits, before she apparently forgot about it and went running toward a display of ammonite fossils that had caught her attention. Victoria saw it. Nathan saw that she'd seen it. Neither of them said anything. But something adjusted, quietly, in the space between them. They got lunch in the museum cafe, which served food that was aggressively mediocre at prices that were not. Emma and Lily sat together and conducted what appeared to be a formal negotiation about whether horses or dinosaurs would win in a direct physical confrontation, a debate that had no resolution but seemed to satisfy both parties by the time the sandwiches arrived. "They're going to be friends," Nathan said, watching them. "They already are," Victoria said. He looked at her. She looked at her coffee. Then they both looked at the children, because it was easier than looking at each other directly, and sometimes easier was the right call. The afternoon stretched longer than planned. That was another pattern she was noticing. Time with Nathan lasted longer than scheduled, not because anyone extended it deliberately, but because there was no urgency to leave, and the absence of urgency turned out to be something she'd been missing without knowing what to call it. They took the kids for hot chocolate after the museum, at a place Emma apparently had opinions about, which turned out to be a small family shop on Meridian Street that had been there for 30 years and did exactly one thing and did it well. Emma ordered with the confidence of someone who had been here many times and knew the proper protocol. Lily watched this and ordered the same thing. Victoria sat across from Nathan in a booth with red vinyl seats and watched her daughter carefully hold a cup that was slightly too big for her hands, concentrating on not spilling with the full force of her 5-year-old will, and felt something tighten in her chest that was not pain and not exactly joy, but lived somewhere in the adjacency of both. "You're doing that thing," Nathan said. She looked at him. "What thing?" "The thing where you're happy and it makes you nervous." She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at her own cup. "I'm not sure that's—" "You don't have to confirm it," he said. "I wasn't asking." She looked up. He wasn't looking at her with anything complicated. He wasn't waiting for her to process it into something speakable. He just said it, the way he said things, plain and direct and without agenda. And now he was watching Emma attempt to teach Lily the proper ratio of cocoa to whipped cream, his expression easy. She sat with the observation for a moment. He wasn't wrong. That was the thing. She was happy, and it did make her nervous, not because of Nathan specifically, but because happiness felt fragile in a way that she'd learned from experience, felt like a thing that existed in proximity to loss, and she had lost enough to be cautious about acquiring more of it to potentially lose. Her therapist, the one she saw twice a month and never mentioned to anyone except Priya, had a name for this, a technical name she could never remember exactly, something about avoidance strategies and emotional self-protection. The point was she did it. She knew she did it. She was doing it right now. "My ex-husband," she said, and then stopped. Nathan waited. "He wasn't—" She started again. "When we were together, everything was always very high register, very dramatic. Very much, everything was an event, and when it ended at the same register. Very loud, very terrible. She looked at her cup. I've spent a few years since then not knowing what it looks like when something is just quiet. Good. He was quiet for a moment. Is that what this is? I think so. A pause. I'm not sure what to do with quiet. Nothing, he said. You don't have to do anything with it. It's quiet. That was such a Nathan Reed answer that she almost laughed. Practical to the point of being almost absurd, and also somehow exactly right. You make it sound simple, she said. I make everything sound simple. It's a flaw. He drank his cocoa. Nothing is actually simple, but most things are also not as complicated as we make them. Lily spilled her cocoa at that exact moment. Not catastrophically, just enough to require napkins and a minor reorganization of the table, which Emma assisted with the competence of an older sibling who had been through this kind of thing before. I'm okay, Lily announced, to no one in particular. We know, baby, Victoria said, already blotting the tablecloth. Nathan handed her a stack of napkins from the dispenser without being asked. His elbow was near her elbow. Neither of them moved away. It was a small thing. It was the kind of small thing that accumulated. March arrived, and with it, a water main problem in Victoria's townhouse that resulted in 3 days of contractors and no functional kitchen, and a noise situation that she was coping with badly because she had 2 board calls and a closing meeting that week, and her concentration was fractured. Lily was with her nanny most of those days, supervised chaos, and Victoria was running on 4 hours of sleep and whatever the coffee cart on the corner was serving. Nathan called on a Tuesday evening, checking in about something minor, a recommendation she'd asked him for. A contractor for the townhouse, actually, which had seemed professionally appropriate and was now paying off in the sense that he'd given her a good name who was dealing with the water main competently. She answered the phone in her kitchen, surrounded by the sound of the main being repaired 1 floor below, and Lily somewhere upstairs narrating an apparently complex adventure to Gerald the horse. How bad is it? He asked, after she'd described the situation. On a scale of 1 to 10, structurally it's a 4. Emotionally, it's a 9. Are you eating actual food? She looked at the granola bar in her hand. Define actual food. A short pause. I'm bringing dinner. Nathan, you don't have to. I've got leftover chili from last night, and Emma's at a sleepover. I'm going to bring it over, and you're going to eat real food, and then I'll look at the repair situation in the basement because Gary is good, but he tends to overlook drainage secondary to the main issue. She could argue. She had a full set of arguments available. The code is 7249, she said. He was there in 40 minutes with a Dutch oven full of chili that was, straightforwardly, the best thing she'd eaten in 4 days. He ate with her at the kitchen island while Lily sat between them and told him, in serious detail, about Gerald's recent adventures, which included a journey to the moon and a dispute with a neighboring horse named something that sounded like Biscuit. Why is Biscuit hostile? Nathan asked. Because Gerald has better land, Lily said, as though this were obvious. He went downstairs after dinner and came back up with a specific concern about the drainage that he texted to Gary with enough detail that Gary apparently adjusted his repair plan, which Victoria discovered the next morning when Gary arrived and preemptively fixed the thing Nathan had identified. She stood in her repaired kitchen with her functional coffee maker and thought, when is the last time someone showed up without it costing me something? It was an ugly thought. She knew it was an ugly thought, the product of years of keeping score in a marriage where the ledger was never balanced in her favor, where every kindness had a price tag she hadn't noticed until the bill came. She knew Nathan wasn't Damien. She knew that. She wasn't confusing them. But knowing something and unknowing the habits it left behind were different categories of work. She picked up her phone and sent him a text. The drainage thing, thank you. Gary sorted it this morning. He replied 3 minutes later, good. Also, Lily's theory about Gerald's land dispute has been in my head all morning. She's going to be an excellent geopolitical strategist. Victoria read the message twice. Then she put her phone down and got to work. She was almost certain, in trouble. The specific kind of trouble that felt like looking over a ledge you'd been standing well back from for a long time and finding that at some point, without deciding to, you'd moved closer. The ground far below. The wind at the edge. The specific electricity of a height you hadn't entirely chosen and weren't entirely sure you could step back from now. She'd been careful. She'd been deliberately, methodically careful. She wasn't sure careful was going to help her now. By April, they had settled into something that had no name and didn't need one yet, which was a sentence Victoria thought and then immediately recognized as the kind of sentence people thought right before they needed a name for something. Nathan had met her assistant Priya, who had assessed him in the particular way Priya assessed things, quietly, thoroughly, from a slight distance, and said nothing afterward except, "His company did the renovation on the building on Colby Street. I looked it up. The review record is excellent." This was Priya's version of enthusiastic approval. Victoria had met Gary, Nathan's best contractor, and, it turned out, also his best friend from childhood, a large and opinionated man who had opinions about everything from load-bearing walls to national politics and expressed them all with equal volume. Nathan appeared to have the specific skill of listening to Gary's loudest opinions with patient amusement rather than irritation, which Victoria filed under things she found quietly impressive. Emma and Lily had, by Victoria's estimate, reached a stage of friendship that was approximately 17 steps ahead of wherever their parents were. They had a shared project involving a map of an imaginary country they were constructing together, which combined Emma's organizational precision and Lily's Baroque approach to world building in a way that produced something extremely detailed and completely incomprehensible to outside observers. Nathan had tried to understand the map. He'd lasted about 10 minutes before declaring it above his pay grade. It was, by any reasonable measure, going well, which was exactly why on a Wednesday morning in the second week of April, when Priya knocked and opened her office door with an expression Victoria hadn't seen in years, something in Victoria's chest went cold before a word was spoken. "You have a call request," Priya said, "from a Damien Cross." The name landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Victoria set her pen down. Carefully. The way you set things down when you needed your hands to do something and your hands were not entirely reliable. "He left a message," Priya continued, and her voice was neutral in the careful way it got when she was actively managing it. "He says he's back in the country. He says he wants to discuss Lily." Victoria looked at her desk, the quarterly reports, the acquisition files, the small framed photo of Lily at the beach that she kept on the corner of the desk, because she needed to be able to see her daughter's face on the days when everything felt like too much. She looked at that photo for a long moment. "Don't put him through," she said. "I already told him you weren't available," Priya said. "But Victoria, he said if you don't call back, he'll go through his attorney." The room was quiet. Outside the window, April was doing what April did. Sunlight and cloud in alternation. The city going about its business, everyone else's ordinary Wednesday continuing in ordinary Wednesday fashion. Victoria picked up her pen. "Get me Miriam Chen's office," she said. "Today." Priya nodded and left, and Victoria sat alone in her office with the photo of her daughter on the corner of her desk, and the name Damien Cross settling into the room like weather. Like the kind of weather that starts cold and distant and then becomes the thing you're standing in before you understood it was coming. She had known, somewhere underneath the quiet good months, that quiet never lasted forever. She had known that. She picked up her pen and wrote nothing. She just sat with it. The way you sat with things when there was nothing yet to do except understand that they had arrived. Miriam Chen had been practicing family law for 22 years, and she had the particular quality of stillness that came from having sat across from a very large number of people in very bad situations. She didn't perform sympathy. She didn't perform alarm. She listened. She noted things on a yellow legal pad in handwriting no one but her could read. And when she spoke, she said exactly what was true, which was both her greatest professional asset and, Victoria imagined, occasionally exhausting to be around socially. Victoria had hired her 2 years ago during the initial divorce proceedings. She was the best in the city. She was also, Victoria had come to understand, someone who genuinely disliked Damien Cross on principle, which she kept entirely out of her professional conduct, but which Victoria had once glimpsed briefly in a conference room when Damien's attorney had said something particularly dishonest, and Miriam's pen had stopped moving for approximately 1 second before continuing. They met on a Thursday morning. Miriam's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Weston Avenue, understated and organized in the way that suggested someone who did not need to perform competence because the competence was simply present. "Tell me exactly what the message said," Miriam began. Victoria told her, word for word, because she had written it down immediately after Priya reported it, not trusting her memory to remain objective. Miriam wrote on her legal pad, "Has he contacted Lily directly?" "No, she doesn't. Lily doesn't know her father in any real sense. He was present for maybe the first 6 months of her life, and then the separation began. She was 2 when the divorce finalized. She knows she has a father who lives somewhere else. That's the extent of it." "Has he paid support consistently?" "The first year, then inconsistently, then not at all for the past 14 months. We have documentation on all of it." Miriam noted this. "Any contact in those 14 months?" "One birthday card. It arrived 6 weeks after Lily's birthday. Lily was 5. She didn't understand why it was late, and I didn't try to explain it." Miriam put her pen down, looked at Victoria directly. "I'm going to tell you what I think is happening, and I want you to understand that this is preliminary. We don't have visibility into his actual legal position yet." A pause. "Damien Cross is not doing this because he misses his daughter. I know that. He's doing it because of you, specifically because of Sterling Acquisition's performance over the last 18 months, which is publicly documented, and because of whatever intelligence he's gathered about your personal life." Victoria looked at her hands on the table. "He knows about Nathan." "Almost certainly. Someone like Cross doesn't resurface without doing his research." Miriam folded her hands. "The tactic is leverage. He can't touch your company. He can't touch your finances through normal channels. The divorce settlement locked most of that down. But custody is a door that never fully closes. The original agreement gave him visitation rights he's never exercised. A family court judge does not look favorably on a parent who files for expanded custody after 14 months of zero contact. But filing costs nothing, and litigation costs you time, money, and attention, which is the point." The room was very quiet. "What does he actually want?" Victoria asked, even though she suspected she knew. "Money, or a business concession, or both. The custody filing is pressure. He'll apply it until you settle for something, and whatever you give him will be just enough to make him go away until the next time he wants something." Miriam picked up her pen again. "That's my read. I've been wrong before." "What do we do?" "We don't settle," Miriam said flatly. "We prepare. We document everything, comprehensively, every missed payment, every missed visit, every birthday card that arrived late, the developmental records, the school records, the medical records. We build the case for what Lily's life actually looks like and what he has and has not contributed to it. And then when he files, and he will file, we meet him in court." Victoria nodded. "Victoria," Miriam's voice shifted slightly. Not softer exactly, more direct. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." A pause. "The man you're seeing, Nathan Reed, how serious is this?" She hadn't expected the question. She sat with it for a moment. "I don't know yet. Does he have any history that could be used against you? Anything in his background, legal, financial, personal, that Damien's attorneys could argue reflects poorly on Lily's environment?" Victoria thought about Nathan, about what she actually knew of him, the construction company, the clean operation, the daughter, the dead wife, the long hours and the modest house, and the complete absence of anything that felt like a secret being kept. "No," she said. "Nothing." "Have you been introducing him to Lily?" "They've spent time together, casually. Nothing. He's not in any parental capacity. He's someone I know." Miriam looked at her steadily. "If this goes to court, every aspect of your life will be examined. The relationship will come up. I'm not telling you to end it. I'm telling you to understand that it becomes part of the picture, and we need to be prepared to present it clearly." Victoria left Miriam's office and stood on the sidewalk on Weston Avenue and watched the Thursday morning traffic and did not allow herself to feel anything for the approximately 4 minutes it took her car to arrive. Then she got in and told her driver to take the long route and sat in the back seat in the way she sat when she needed to not arrive anywhere yet. She was going to have to tell Nathan. Us. She did it that weekend, on a Saturday afternoon when Emma and Lily were at Emma's grandmother's house for a birthday party. An arrangement that had evolved naturally from the friendship between the girls, Lily now included in things that were Emma's world the same way Emma had been folded into things that were Lily's. Nathan came to the townhouse. She made coffee, a thing she did with less competence than most things in her life and with no pretense otherwise, and they sat at the kitchen table. And she told him. She told him plainly. Damien Cross, the call, Miriam's assessment, the strategy. She did not tell it dramatically or with the particular emotional loading that the situation possibly warranted. She told it the way she reported things that required decision-making, clearly in the correct sequence, with the relevant data included. When she finished, Nathan was quiet. He was looking at his coffee cup. She couldn't read his expression easily, which was unusual because she'd become reasonably good at reading him over the past months. He had a legible face, but right now there was something behind it she couldn't categorize. "How long has he been gone?" he asked. "Actively absent for about 2 years. Before that, he was intermittently present in a way that was almost worse than absent." "Lily's never asked about him?" "Once, about a year ago. She asked if she had a daddy. I told her yes, that he lived somewhere far away and wasn't able to be with us. She accepted that. She's never pushed further." Victoria wrapped both hands around her mug. "Children they adapt to the information they're given. They don't usually ask for more than they're ready for." He nodded slowly. "What does your attorney think his chances are?" "Low. His record is bad. But low isn't zero, and the process itself is damage regardless of outcome." She paused. "I wanted you to know because things are going to get more complicated for a while, and you should have the choice to decide what you want to do with that information." There it was, the sentence she'd been building toward for 20 minutes, the one she'd almost rewritten 4 times between his arrival and now. You should have the choice, because she had seen what happened when she didn't give people choices and then blamed them for the choices she'd made on their behalf, and she wasn't going to do that again. Nathan looked up from his coffee cup. "Is that you telling me I should leave?" "That's me making sure you know that leaving is an option." "Victoria." He said her name in that flat, careful way he had when he was about to be very direct. "When Emma's school called me last year to tell me she'd had an anxiety attack in class, I left a job site mid-morning and drove 40 minutes to sit in the school nurse's office for 2 hours until she calmed down. That cost me $6,000 in delayed labor. Did I think about whether I should do that?" She looked at him. "No," he said. "I didn't. Because she needed me there." He put his cup down. "I'm not saying that to compare the situations. I'm saying it because you're asking me if I'm the kind of person who leaves when things get complicated, and I think you know the answer to that already. I think you've known for a while." A beat. "You're just scared." The words sat in the room. She didn't argue with it. She couldn't. He was, as he periodically was, infuriatingly accurate. "Complicated is an understatement," she said finally. "Yeah, I know." He picked up his cup again. "Tell me what you need." She hadn't expected that either. She'd expected reassurance, or pushback, or the kind of well-intentioned advice that was actually about the advice giver's own discomfort with a problem. She hadn't expected that specific question, direct and practical, and without presumption. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "Okay." He drank his coffee. "When you know, tell me." That was it. He didn't make her promise things or ask her to define what they were to each other, or use the situation as an occasion for a conversation about the relationship that she wasn't ready to have. He just said, "When you know, tell me." And then he asked if she wanted more coffee, and she said yes, and he stood up and refilled her cup from the carafe and sat back down. And they sat together in the kitchen for another hour talking about other things. And she felt the specific relief of not having to perform okayness for someone who could already see she wasn't okay and wasn't asking her to pretend. Damien Cross filed in May. The papers arrived through Miriam's office, which was exactly how it should have gone, and Miriam called Victoria directly rather than sending email because this was the kind of thing that warranted a voice. She was measured and precise, and she had already begun the response preparation before she called. which was one of the reasons Victoria paid her what she paid her. He's filing for joint physical custody, Miriam said, 50-50. He's also requesting a modification of the original support arrangement in his favor, which is a brief pause. Creative, given the record. Joint physical. Victoria was standing in her office. She'd been in the middle of a contract review. The contract was no longer relevant. He wants her half the time. That's the filing. It doesn't reflect what a court will give him. It reflects what he's opening with. Miriam's voice was steady. He's also included a declaration from a child development professional, someone I've never heard of, which is itself interesting, arguing that Lily's current environment is too insular, that she doesn't have sufficient male presence in her formative development. The specific cold that settled in Victoria's chest at that was something she'd felt before, in different forms, in the years of the marriage. The feeling of someone using her daughter as a weapon in a fight that was never actually about her daughter. He's citing Nathan, she said. It wasn't a question. He's citing the presence of an unvetted male figure in Lily's daily environment, yes. He doesn't name him directly in the initial filing, but the implication is clear. Victoria sat down. Her office was quiet. Through the window, the city was doing what it did, purposeful and indifferent, all those lives intersecting and separating with no knowledge of anyone else's private disasters. Miriam, she said, I need this to be over cleanly. I need Lily to never... She cannot be in a courtroom. She cannot be questioned. I need whatever this is to happen entirely away from her. That's the goal, Miriam said. It may not entirely be possible, but it's the goal. In the meantime, I need everything, every document, every record, every communication from him in the past 3 years. Financial records showing the support failures, Lily's teachers, her pediatrician, anyone who can speak to her stability and your consistency as her parent. A pause. And I need you to be prepared for it to get worse before it gets better. He has resources and he's motivated, and his attorney is someone I've dealt with before. She's good. So are you, Victoria said. A brief silence. Yes, Miriam said without false modesty. I am. May became the month everything ran simultaneously. Victoria was managing the legal process, the company's Pacific expansion entering its most demanding phase, a board member who was making noise about governance concerns that were really about wanting a larger role, and Lily, who had developed a persistent low-grade cold that kept her home from school for a week and required a level of attention that Victoria gave willingly and without resentment, but that cost her hours she was already not sure she had. She didn't tell Lily anything. Lily was 5. She didn't need to know. What Lily knew was that her mother was tired sometimes, and that Gerald the horse was still conducting his border dispute with Biscuit, and that Emma was her best friend, and that Nathan had nice boots and also made excellent pancakes on the Saturday mornings when he and Emma came over, which had become a recurring thing, the kind of recurring thing that settles into a life so gradually that you can't identify the morning it became a habit. Nathan made pancakes in her kitchen on Saturday mornings. He'd done it the first time because Lily had asked directly, "Can you make pancakes like Emma's daddy makes?" And Nathan had made them, and they were objectively better than Victoria's because Victoria's pancakes were, she acknowledged without distress, terrible. He made them from scratch with buttermilk, which he'd brought because he'd somehow known she wouldn't have buttermilk, and the Saturday mornings in her kitchen had become the thing she most looked forward to in a week that was otherwise grinding her down. She felt guilty about that, not about Nathan, about the specific comfort of it, about needing it. She'd spent 5 years building herself into someone who didn't need things, who ran her own systems, who could be alone and functional and fine, and the efficiency of that self-sufficiency was now complicated by the fact that a person existed who made Saturday mornings better, and she didn't know what to do with that dependency. She mentioned this to her therapist. Her therapist said, "Needing things from people is not a weakness, Victoria. It's how relationships work." I know that intellectually. Knowing it intellectually and knowing it in your nervous system are different kinds of knowing. Yes, Victoria said. That's exactly the problem. She did not mention to her therapist that Damien had filed, because that session had been scheduled before the filing and she was out of capacity to have that conversation that week. She rescheduled for the following week and spent the interim in a state of managed functionality that she suspected was visible to people who were paying attention. Nathan was paying attention. He didn't press. That was the thing about him that she kept returning to. He noticed and he waited, and the waiting was not passive. It was active. It was a choice he made every time, to not push past what she offered. And she understood it as something that cost him something, that restraint, because he was not by nature someone who left things unaddressed. He was direct to a fault in most things. With her, he was consistently patient, and she suspected he was burning something to sustain it. He said it, finally, on a Tuesday evening in late May when he'd come over to look at a kitchen cabinet that had been sticking for 2 weeks, a home maintenance visit that had become another recurring thing, and found her sitting at the kitchen table at 9 o'clock at night with a glass of wine and a legal document she wasn't actually reading. Victoria. She looked up. He stood in the kitchen doorway with the cabinet hardware in his hand. He'd already fixed it. She hadn't heard him do it. She'd been staring at the document for an hour without seeing it. "You need to talk about it," he said. "I'm fine." "You've been fine for 3 weeks. You're doing it the way you do it, which is, you're managing it. All of it. You're managing it into the ground." He set the hardware on the counter. "And I get that. I understand why. But I'm watching you carry this entire thing by yourself, and I'm right here." She looked at the document. "I'm trying to protect you," she said. It came out smaller than she intended. "From what?" "From being part of this. Damien's attorney is going to use everything. Every person in Lily's life is fair game." She looked up. "I don't want you subpoenaed. I don't want you deposed. I don't want your business records examined and your personal history examined, and every time you've ever been near my daughter scrutinized for, I don't want to do that to you." He was quiet for a moment. "Have you considered," he said, "that maybe that's not your decision to make for me?" She opened her mouth. "I know you're trying to protect me," he said, before she could speak. "I know that's what it is, but you're doing the thing where you decide what I can handle without asking me." He wasn't angry. He was deliberate, like he'd been thinking about how to say this for a while. "I'm a grown man. I've handled worse than a deposition, and I was already in this, whatever this is, knowing it was complicated. You told me up front. You gave me the information, and I chose to stay." He paused. "Let me choose again." The kitchen was quiet, the wine in her glass, the legal document on the table, Nathan standing in the doorway with the absolute stillness of someone who'd made up his mind and was now waiting for her to make up hers. She thought about Miriam's question. How serious is this? She thought about her own answer. I don't know yet. She thought about that, and then she thought about Saturday mornings with buttermilk pancakes and the weight of her daughter falling asleep against his shoulder at the museum and the way he'd said, "I'm right here," like it was a simple geographic fact and not the hardest thing anyone had said to her in years. "Damien wants joint physical custody," she said. 50-50. He filed in May. Nathan crossed the kitchen and sat down at the table. He didn't say anything. He just sat down. She told him everything. The whole of it. Miriam's assessment, the strategy, the declaration about male figures in Lily's environment, the way Damien's attorney was going to comb through her life. She told it without managing the emotional temperature of it, which meant her voice went uneven in a couple of places, and she let it, because she was tired of the alternative. When she finished, Nathan said, "What does Miriam need?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "This is unbelievable." Not, "I can't believe he'd do that." Just, "What does she need?" Victoria looked at him. "You'd help." "Of course I'll help," said like it was obvious, like she was asking whether water was wet. "What does she need from me?" "She'll want a statement about the time you've spent with Lily, demonstrating that her environment is stable, that the people in her life are consistent, and vetted is the word they'll use." "Fine. It means your background will be checked. Finances, work history, all of it." "Fine." "Nathan." She stopped. I need you to understand what you're agreeing to. If this goes to court and Damien's attorney knows about you, they'll—" "Victoria," he said it firmly, not unkindly, but firmly. "I've been a single parent for 3 years. I know what it means when someone's trying to weaponize your parenting record against you. I know what that fight looks like from the outside." He leaned forward, forearms on the table. I'm not going anywhere. That's the only thing I can tell you with complete certainty. Everything else, the legal stuff, what his attorneys do, how long this takes, I can't control any of that. But I'm not leaving." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" she asked. And it came out genuinely, without tactic. She wanted to understand it. Wanted to understand what made a person make that choice, plant themselves in the middle of someone else's complicated life, and refuse to be moved. He thought about it. She could see him thinking about it, not searching for the right words, but actually examining the thing itself. "Because Lily asked me once if Gerald could come to our house," he said finally. "And she said our house, not your house, ours." He paused. She didn't know she said it. She was talking about the horse, but she said it like it was true, and I thought, I want it to be true. I want that to be the word. He held her gaze. "That's why." The kitchen was very quiet. Victoria looked at him. You looked at him, and for the second time since that night in the cafe, she felt the armor doing nothing at all, just sitting on her like dead weight. And underneath it, she was just a person who was scared and tired and also, against several years of deliberate effort, in love with a man who showed up on Tuesday evenings to fix stuck cabinet drawers. She didn't say that. She wasn't ready to say that yet. But she reached across the table and put her hand on his, and he turned his hand over and held hers, and they sat like that in the quiet kitchen for a while without needing to say anything else. The first court hearing was in June. It was procedural, a scheduling conference, in Miriam's description, where both attorneys laid out the framework and the judge set the timeline. Nothing decisive would happen. But Damien would be in the room, and Victoria had not been in a room with Damien Cross for 2 years, which was precisely the right amount of time, and also not nearly enough. She recognized him immediately, which was stupid, because of course she would. He was 41 now, slightly broader through the shoulders than she remembered, wearing a suit that was aggressively expensive in a way that telegraphed itself. He had the same qualities she'd been attracted to 22 years ago and had later understood as performance, a kind of magnetic certainty, the impression of a man who knew exactly where everything was going and had arranged it. He glanced at her when she walked in. Didn't say anything. Gave her the precise degree of acknowledgement that communicated. "I'm not concerned." She gave him nothing. She'd learned nothing from him. She'd developed nothing from the years of the marriage. She sat beside Miriam and opened her folder and looked at the documents inside without reading them. The proceedings were 90 minutes of procedural architecture, motions, objections, scheduling. The judge was a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a chain and the demeanor of someone who had heard every variation of this particular story and had long since formed views about most of it. She looked at Damien's attorney with the kind of neutral expression that could mean anything, and she looked at Miriam with slightly more. Damien spoke twice, briefly, when the judge addressed him directly. He was charming. He was measured. He said the words "my daughter" with the specific weight of someone who had practiced the phrase until it sounded natural. Victoria kept her face still. In the hallway afterward, Damien's attorney, Catherine Wells, 50s, methodical, the kind of good that was about endurance rather than brilliance, stopped Miriam for a brief exchange. Victoria stood slightly apart and watched Damien straighten his jacket and check his phone. He looked up, met her eyes. "You look well," he said, pleasantly. Like it was a coincidence they'd ended up in the same courthouse hallway. "Damien," she said, just his name, nothing else. "How's Lily?" The question was designed exactly the way it was designed, Shakul, to make her demonstrate emotion in a public space where demonstration of emotion was a liability. She knew it. Knowing it didn't make the heat behind her sternum any smaller. "Lily is fine," she said. "She's always fine. No thanks to the 14 months in which you provided neither contact nor financial support." She kept her voice even. "If you genuinely want to know about your daughter, I'd suggest starting there." Something moved in his expression. Not shame. She'd stopped expecting shame from Damien in year 2 of the marriage. Something more like recalibration, like she'd pushed back harder than expected. "This doesn't have to be a fight," he said. "You filed for custody after 14 months of absence," she said. "You made this a fight. I'm just here to finish it." She turned and walked back to Miriam, who had finished her exchange with Catherine Wells and was watching Victoria return with an expression that might, in different lighting, have been approval. "Well," Miriam said quietly as they walked toward the elevator. I know, Victoria said. Too much. I was going to say, good. The deposition was in late June. Victoria had been deposed before, in a contract dispute 4 years earlier, and she was not unfamiliar with the format. The small room, the court reporter, the careful architecture of questions designed to build something you couldn't see clearly until it was assembled. She wore a gray suit and brought water and kept her hands flat on the table the way Miriam had coached, and she answered every question with the minimum necessary words. Catherine Wells was methodical. She built from small things toward large ones. The divorce timeline, the support history from Damien's perspective, the custody arrangements in the original agreement. She was working toward Nathan. Victoria could feel it, the way you felt a weather shift. Ms. Sterling, can you describe the nature of your current personal relationship with Nathan Reed? He's someone I spend time with. In what capacity? Socially? Does Mr. Reed spend time with your daughter? Yes. On occasion? How frequently? On weekends sometimes. It varies. Is he present in your home? He's been to my home. On a regular basis? He's visited. I don't have a specific frequency to give you. Wells moved slightly in her chair, the tell of someone shifting strategy mid-corridor. Does your daughter call Mr. Reed by a familiar name? Victoria paused. Half a second, no more. She calls him Nathan, she said. She hasn't given him a parental nickname of any kind? Miriam's hand touched her arm briefly. The signal. Not that I'm aware of, Victoria said. It wasn't untrue. Lily had never called him anything other than Nathan in Victoria's hearing. What Victoria didn't say, what she couldn't say, was that Lily had once told Emma, within Victoria's earshot but not directed at her, that Nathan was kind of like a daddy, but better because he listens to the Gerald story every time. Victoria had heard it and said nothing, and filed it in the part of herself that she was carefully managing. The deposition lasted 4 hours. She was in the parking garage by herself for 10 minutes before she called Miriam, and then she stood in the concrete quiet with her hand flat against her car and breathed very deliberately, the way she'd learned to breathe in places where she could not afford to fall apart. Then she called Nathan. He picked up on the second ring. She could hear the sight in the background. Hey, he said. Hey. Her voice was steadier than she felt. It's done. How was it? Exactly what it was always going to be. A pause. She asked about you. A brief silence. What did you say? What I'm allowed to say at this stage. She pressed her other hand against the car. Nathan, the thing Wells is building. She's going to argue that Lily's environment is unstable, that introducing a male presence without formal structure is confusing for her development, and she's going to make you part of that argument. Let her. You understand what that means. Your life is going to be Victoria. His voice was calm. The specific calm that she'd learned wasn't the absence of feeling, but the presence of decision. I talked to Miriam last week. I gave her everything she asked for. I'm ready for whatever Wells has. A pause. Are you okay? She almost said I'm fine. She could feel the sentence ready in her throat, the automatic response. 5 years of practice, self-sufficiency assembled and waiting. Instead, she said, no, not really, but I will be. Yeah, he said, you will. It was the right thing to say. Not it'll all work out, which she didn't believe. Not you've got this, which was what people said when they wanted to close the subject. Just, you will. A statement of fact, no timeline attached. Like he'd looked at who she was and concluded the outcome was not in serious doubt, even if the path was. She got in her car. She had 2 meetings that afternoon and a call with the Pacific Expansion lead at 4 and Lily's bedtime at 7:30. And somewhere in between all of that, she was going to have to find the hours to review Miriam's counterfiling and prepare for the next stage of something that was going to get worse before it got better. But she had his voice on the other side of the phone, steady and unhurried. She drove back to the office. The summer, this difficult, grinding, relentless summer, was not over. The worst of it, in some ways, was still ahead. But she drove back to the office and she sat at her desk and she picked up the phone and she did the next thing, because that was what she knew how to do. And somewhere across the city, Nathan Reed was on a job site with his hands in something concrete and real, and he had said, "You will." She held on to that. The summer had a specific texture that Victoria would remember long afterward. Not in images exactly, but in sensation. The weight of files. The smell of Miriam's conference room, which was always slightly too cold. The sound of Lily sleeping down the hall while she sat at the kitchen table at midnight reviewing documents she'd already reviewed twice. The way July heat pressed against the townhouse windows and made the city outside look slightly unreal, like a backdrop someone had put up while the actual world was being rebuilt somewhere else. July was depositions and document requests and the slow, grinding machinery of litigation doing what it did. Not dramatic, not the way courtroom things looked on television, but tedious in the way that was its own kind of assault. Tedious in the way that was designed to cost you time and money and attention until the cost outweighed the fight. Damien understood this. His attorney understood it. The whole strategy was premised on it. What they hadn't fully accounted for was Miriam Chen, who did not get tired, or who, if she did get tired, showed no evidence of it. She was thorough in a way that felt almost aggressive. Every request from Wells's office was met with a counter-request. Every document they produced was matched with documentation from Victoria's side that was more thorough and better organized. Miriam ran her practice like a construction project, in Nathan's analogy, which he'd offered one Saturday morning over pancakes when Victoria was describing the legal situation, and he was listening with the focused attention he gave things he was trying to understand. "She's building a wall faster than they can tear it down," he said. "More or less. And the teardown crew is expensive. Extremely. Is Damien running out of money?" Victoria poured coffee. "He's not running out of money, but he's spending more than he expected, which affects the calculus." She looked at her cup. "The goal was to pressure me into a settlement. We haven't settled. Every month this continues is a month he's paying Catherine Wells for a case that isn't moving toward where he wants." Nathan turned to Pancake. He did this by feel, apparently, without looking, the way people did things they'd done 10,000 times. "So you wait him out?" "Partially. We also build." She sat down at the island. Miriam is assembling the full picture. Everything Lily's been doing for 5 years. Her teachers, her pediatrician, her development records, the financial record of every single thing I've provided for her. And the support failures, every missed payment, every month of silence. Is there a lot of it? 14 months of zero payments. 18 months before that of irregular payments. 2 missed visitation periods in the first year that he didn't even bother to reschedule. She wrapped her hands around her mug. "He hasn't seen her in over 2 years, Nathan. Whatever argument he makes in that courtroom, that's the number he has to answer for." Nathan was quiet for a moment, and she recognized his expression. The one where he was feeling something he wasn't sure he had the right to say. "Say it," she said. He looked at her. "She's a good kid, Lily. She's... whatever he did and didn't do, she came out the other side of it a really good kid. That's you." She didn't know what to do with that sentence, so she looked at her coffee. "Emma calls her sister," Nathan said. "Just for the record. I didn't ask her to. I don't know when it started. It's just what she says." Victoria looked up. "My daughter has a sister," he said. Quiet, matter of fact, like he was reporting the weather. "That's not something I take lightly." She held his gaze for a moment. Then Lily came running in from the hallway in her pajamas, demanding to know if the pancakes had blueberries. And the moment closed over itself the way moments did, and Nathan turned back to the stove, and life continued. But she sat with what he'd said for the rest of the morning, and most of the afternoon. And when Lily came to her that evening and asked if Emma could sleep over next weekend, Victoria said yes before she'd finished the question. The turning point, when it came, arrived from an unexpected direction. Miriam called on a Thursday afternoon in late July, and her voice had a quality it didn't usually have. Not excitement, exactly, but the controlled tension of someone holding something significant with careful hands. "We have the financial records from the joint account," she said, "the one he closed during the divorce proceedings." Victoria set her pen down. "And he made 3 withdrawals in the month before Lily was born. Significant amounts. They were characterized in the divorce as business expenses." A pause. They weren't business expenses. The specific quality of silence that settled over the phone line was the kind that preceded something decisive. What were they? Victoria asked, though some part of her already suspected. Personal expenses. Specifically, an apartment lease in Paris in someone else's name, and what appear to be deposits for travel arrangements that don't correspond to any documented business travel. Miriam's voice remained even. He was having an affair during the pregnancy. He was liquidating joint assets to fund it, and he hid it during the financial disclosure in the divorce. Victoria put the phone down on the desk, not hanging up, just setting it down. She sat for a moment with the specific quality of this information, not shock exactly. She'd known about the affair, or suspected it, the way you suspected things you didn't want confirmed and so didn't investigate. But knowing it as a private intuition and having it documented in a financial record with a court case pending were entirely different categories. She picked up the phone. "Is it usable?" she asked. "It's admissible, and it's relevant. It speaks directly to his credibility as a parent, his financial honesty during the divorce proceedings, and the conditions under which Lily was born and the marriage ended. It's not the center of our case, but it becomes the context that frames everything else he says." Miriam paused. "Victoria, this changes the trajectory. Does Wells know we have it?" "Not yet. We got it through the expanded financial discovery that they resisted, which, their resistance to it now looks like exactly what it was." "When do you disclose?" "I'd like to hold it through the next round of depositions. Let him establish his narrative on the record first." A beat. "Let him build the house, then show the court the foundation." Victoria thought about this. About Damien in that conference room, measured, performed, saying "my daughter" with his rehearsed weight. She thought about him in that courtroom in June, looking at her with the expression that said, "I'm not concerned." "Do it your way," she said. She hung up and sat at her desk for a long time. Outside, the city continued in its summer heat, and in the playroom down the hall, she could hear Lily explaining something to her nanny in the serious tone she used when she was narrating Gerald's latest territorial developments. She thought, "This is almost over." She thought it carefully, without conviction, the way you thought things you wanted badly and were afraid of wanting. August arrived, and with it, Nathan arrived. Not in any formal way, not in any way that was declared or decided. He arrived the way he'd arrived in all things, gradually, consistently, until his presence was so woven into the texture of the week that its absence would have registered as something missing. He was at the townhouse most Saturday mornings. He and Gary had come twice to deal with home maintenance things Victoria had been deferring, a gutter situation, a bathroom tile that had been lifting since March. And Nathan had done both things without billing her, which she had objected to on principle, and he had waved off with the particular logic that Gary needed practice on the tile technique, and she was doing him a favor, which was so obviously untrue that she'd let it go rather than have the argument that would end with her feeling managed. She paid for the materials and said nothing about the labor. Emma came with him sometimes. Emma was 7.5 now, and in full command of her opinions, which had expanded from dinosaurs and cartography to include strong views on the correct preparation of macaroni and cheese, the injustice of assigned seating in school, and the political situation in the imaginary country she and Lily were still developing, which had apparently experienced a constitutional crisis of some kind that both girls were taking very seriously. "The northern provinces are rebelling," Emma explained one morning at the kitchen table with the grave tone of a diplomat briefing a cabinet, "because Gerald's land redistribution was unfair." "Gerald's a horse," Nathan said. "Gerald is the Duke of the Northern Provinces," Lily said, with the patience of someone explaining something for the 15th time. Nathan looked at Victoria. "I've lost track." "You were never on track," Victoria told him. "That's fair." These mornings were the things she protected most fiercely in the calendar. She guarded them the way she guarded Lily's bedtime and her bi-monthly therapy sessions, and the small handful of other things she'd learned at some cost were non-negotiable for her ability to function. Saturday mornings with Nathan and Emma and Lily and terrible imaginary geopolitics and buttermilk pancakes. It was the most ordinary thing in her life and the most valuable. She told her therapist this. Her therapist said, "What does it mean to you that the most valuable thing in your life right now is ordinary?" Victoria thought about it. That I've been spending a lot of time in the extraordinary, and it's expensive. And ordinary is safe, she said. Then, reconsidering, no, not safe. Sustainable. Ordinary is sustainable. Do you trust it to last? She sat with that question for a while. I trust him, she said finally. I don't fully trust that things last, but I trust him. Her therapist nodded and wrote something. The night the car broke down was in October. Victoria had been driving back from a site visit 2 hours north of the city, a property she was considering for the Pacific expansion, a piece of land that required seeing in person rather than in reports. And she'd taken Lily because Lily had been cooped up for a long week of cold and school stress and needed air and motion. It had been a good day, actually. The property was more promising than the reports suggested, and Lily had spent 2 hours running through an empty field in her boots, narrating an adventure that apparently involved Gerald's diplomatic mission to a neighboring province. And Victoria had watched her daughter run and felt the specific piece of open space after too many months of conference rooms and courtrooms. They were an hour from the city when the car stuttered, then stopped. Victoria pulled onto the shoulder. The dashboard was doing something she didn't recognize, a cluster of warning lights she'd never seen before. The engine made a sound and then didn't. The road was rural, 2 lanes, October dark settling in fast around the edges of the headlights. Mommy? Lily's voice from the back seat, uncertain. It's okay, baby. The car just needs a minute. It became clear within 2 minutes that the car did not just need a minute. She called roadside assistance and was told the wait was 90 minutes due to volume. She called her driver, who was unavailable. She called Priya, who would move heaven to solve problems but was not physically close enough to solve this one. She sat on the shoulder of a dark country road with her daughter, and the October cold beginning to press through the windows, and she called Nathan. He picked up on the first ring. She told him where she was. He said one thing, I'm coming. She started to say he didn't have to, and he said, Victoria, in that flat, certain way, and she stopped. He arrived in 53 minutes. She didn't time it deliberately. She noticed it because 53 minutes was faster than she'd calculated was possible from his side of the city, which meant he hadn't stopped for anything. His truck pulled up behind her car on the shoulder, headlights cutting through the dark. He got out and came to her window first, not to the engine, not to the car, to her window, where she was sitting with Lily asleep across the back seat and Victoria's coat draped over her. You okay? He asked. We're fine. I'm sorry to... Don't apologize. He looked at Lily, sleeping, and his face did something she'd seen before. That particular expression he reserved for the children, something that had no performance in it at all. She okay? She slept about 20 minutes ago. She was fine. He looked at the car. What did it do? She told him. He went around to the hood and looked at things in the way men looked at car engines. She'd always found this ritual slightly mysterious, the premise that looking at an engine revealed things about it, and then came back. Coolant, he said. There's a leak and it overheated. It's not driving anywhere tonight. The tow's coming? 90 minutes was the estimate. I'll wait with you. He went back to his truck and got a blanket from behind the seat, which he brought and handed through the window. For Lily, car's gonna get colder. She took the blanket. You drove almost an hour. Yeah. On a Tuesday night. I know what day it is. He leaned against the car door, unhurried, looking out at the dark road. How was the property? She looked at him. You want to talk about the property? We're going to be here for a while. I'm asking because I'm curious. So she told him about the property, and he listened with actual interest, and asked about the access road situation, which was the thing she'd been most concerned about, and offered a perspective on the drainage issue from a construction standpoint that she hadn't considered. And Lily slept in the back seat, under the blanket, and the October dark sat around them, and the tow truck was late by 20 minutes, and none of it was... She was going to say fine, but it was more than fine. It was something else. It was the feeling, standing on the shoulder of a rural road in October, of not being alone with something. She had been alone with so many things for so long. She had become expert at being alone with things. She thought she'd lost the ability to recognize its opposite, but standing there in the dark, she knew it. Knew it the way you knew temperatures, not by thought, but by sensation. When the tow truck finally came and the car was loaded and Lily was transferred, still sleeping, to the back seat of Nathan's truck, wrapped in the blanket, Nathan held the door while Victoria climbed in. She stopped in the doorway for a moment, half in and half out. He was standing right there, not close in a way that demanded anything, just there. "Nathan," she said. He looked at her. "I love you." She said it without planning to. It came out with the simplicity of something that had been true for a while and had just decided it was done waiting. I should have said it before now. I've been careful with it, because I'm careful with things, and that's probably been, I know it's been, Victoria. He said it gently, cutting the rest off without urgency. She stopped. "I know," he said. She looked at him. "You know." "I've known for a while." A brief thing moved through his expression. Not quite a smile, something more interior. "I've been waiting for you to get there." "That must have been annoying." "Sometimes," he said honestly. "Yeah." She almost laughed. It came out as something halfway between a laugh and something else entirely. He put his hand on the side of her face, briefly, one gesture, warm and deliberate, and then he stepped back and nodded toward the truck cab. "Come on, let's get Lily home." She got in. He went around to the driver's side, and she listened to his footsteps on the gravel, and Lily made a small sound in her sleep and shifted slightly in the back seat, and Nathan got in and started the truck and pulled out onto the dark road toward the city. She looked at his profile in the dashboard light, the set of his jaw, the hands easy on the wheel. She had been alone with things for a very long time. She wasn't anymore. September and October had been depositions and filings and the slow, careful preparation of what Miriam called the full evidentiary picture. In November, Damien's side requested a settlement conference. Miriam read this as what it was, an acknowledgement that the case was not where they'd expected it to be, that the financial records had done their damage to Damien's credibility before he ever took the stand, that Catherine Wells was a good attorney who could read the room, and the room was not good. "He wants out," Miriam said, "not because he loves Lily, because this is expensive, and it's not working." "What does out look like?" Victoria asked. "He'll propose something modest. Token visitation, maybe 1 weekend a month. Support payments at a reduced figure, framed as a gesture of goodwill." "No," Victoria said. Miriam looked at her. "I want the full case on record," Victoria said. "I want the court to see everything. I want the financial disclosure failures documented by a judge, not settled away in a conference room." She sat forward. "Damien is going to have more money in 3 years, or 5 years, or 10. He's going to want something again. I need a court record that is so comprehensive and so documented that the next time he tries this, the entire case is already built." She paused. "I'm not settling to make this comfortable. I'm going to court." Miriam regarded her for a moment. "It means the stand. You'll have to testify." "I know. It's harder than a deposition. Wells will have more room." "I know that too." "And it means the financial records go fully public. What was in that Paris apartment account?" "I know what it means." Victoria held her gaze. "I know what all of it means. I want the record." Miriam picked up her pen. "Then we go to court." The trial was scheduled for the second week of November. It ran 4 days. Nathan did not come to the courthouse. He and Victoria had talked about this. He'd offered, and she'd thought about it carefully, and her conclusion was that his being there created a visual that Wells could use in her closing, a way to frame Nathan's presence as the competing male figure around whom the entire household had reoriented. Miriam agreed. He stayed away. He kept his phone nearby for all 4 days. She knew this without being told. He texted her at 7:30 every morning. Nothing elaborate. Just, "I'm here." The same 2 words, each morning, like a marker. The first day was the procedural framework and Damien's opening, which Catherine Wells delivered with the careful structure of someone who knew she was working with less than she'd expected. The evidence of a devoted father, long distance, struggling to maintain connection across absence, and a difficult co-parenting relationship. It was not, by Victoria's assessment, convincing, but it was professional. It did its job. The second day was Damien's testimony. Victoria sat in the courtroom and watched her ex-husband take the stand and looked at her hands on the table. She could feel Miriam beside her, still ready. Damien testified with the practiced ease of someone who had been coached extensively. He spoke about his business travel, the difficulty of distance, his love for his daughter. He mentioned Lily's name 11 times. Victoria counted. Wells walked him carefully away from the financial records, deftly, professionally, minimizing the exposure. She built her picture: a father who had made mistakes, who acknowledged them, who was seeking not to take but to participate. A child who deserved to know her father. Cross-examination was Miriam's. She was precise and unhurried, which was more devastating than speed. She established the timeline of support payments, each missed month, named and dated. She established the visitation record, each scheduled period that had passed without Damien taking it. She established the communication record, the 17-month gap during which Lily had received one birthday card, late. Mr. Cross, in the 14 months from March of last year through May of this year, how many times did you initiate contact with your daughter? A pause. There were business complications. How many times, Mr. Cross? I sent a card, one birthday card that arrived 6 weeks after her birthday, correct? Yes. In those 14 months, you sent no other written communication, correct? Correct. No phone calls? No. No video calls? No. No visits? No. And in those same 14 months, you missed 14 consecutive monthly support payments. I had financial difficulties. Ms. Sterling's financial records show that Sterling Acquisitions posted a 31% revenue increase in that same period. You were aware of that? Yes. You were aware that your daughter's mother was generating significantly increased income during the period in which you chose not to pay child support. Damien's attorney objected. The judge sustained it, but the room had heard it. The financial records came in on day 3. Miriam walked the court through them with the methodical patience of a teacher who wanted to make sure every student in the back of the room understood exactly what they were looking at. The withdrawals, the Paris account, the dates that overlapped with the 3rd trimester of Victoria's pregnancy with Lily. Damien's face, across the courtroom, was a study in controlled damage. Victoria watched it briefly and then looked away. She had not come here to watch him suffer. She had come here to protect her daughter. On day 4, Victoria took the stand. She'd thought, preparing for this, that she knew what it would be like. She'd been deposed. She'd been in courtrooms before, on the periphery of this same case, of earlier negotiations, of the original divorce. She understood the architecture. But sitting in the witness chair with the courtroom around her and the judge at the bench, and across the room Damien in his expensive suit, something shifted in her chest. Not fear. Something more complicated than fear. Miriam walked her through the 5 years. She answered each question in sequence, measured and clear. Lily's birth, the separation, the custody arrangement, the support record, the development record, preschool, the kindergarten teacher who had submitted a written assessment, the pediatrician who had seen Lily monthly since she was 3 weeks old. Then Miriam asked, "Ms. Sterling, can you describe what it has meant to raise Lily alone?" She hadn't expected that question in exactly that form. She'd expected the factual questions and had prepared for the factual questions. This was different. She sat for a moment. "It has meant," she said slowly, "making every decision alone. Every medical decision, every school decision, every decision about how to answer the questions a 5-year-old asks about why her father doesn't visit. Alone." She paused. "It has meant working 14-hour days and then coming home to bedtime stories, because the work doesn't stop because you're the only parent. It has meant being sick and still making breakfast. It has meant missing meetings that I couldn't reschedule and attending school events that fell in the middle of board calls, because she needs both things, and I'm the only person providing both things." The courtroom was quiet. "Has it been difficult?" Miriam asked. Yes. She didn't elaborate. She'd found in life that the direct answer was stronger than the decorated one. Would you describe it as impossible? Victoria looked at her daughter's face. Not literally, Lily wasn't there, but in her mind she looked at it. The star sweater, the serious dark eyes, the way she'd said "our house" casually, meaning it. No, she said, not impossible. She paused. She's the easiest thing in my life. Everything else is hard. She's the part that makes the hard parts have a reason. Somewhere in the courtroom, someone shifted in their seat. The judge had stopped writing. Wells's cross-examination focused on Nathan. She established the timeline of his introduction into the household, his presence on weekends, the nature of his relationship with Lily. She asked whether Victoria had vetted him before allowing him access to her daughter. She asked whether Victoria had considered the psychological impact of introducing a male figure into a child's life without formal structure. I've considered the psychological impact of every person in my daughter's life, Victoria said, including her father. The difference is that the people I have chosen to allow near her have actually been there. It was the sharpest thing she said on the stand. She saw Miriam's expression fractionally adjust. She had one more question from Wells. Miss Sterling, would you say that your relationship with Mr. Reed has influenced your daughter's perception of what a father should be? Victoria thought about Emma saying sister, about Gerald's land dispute and the Natural History Museum, and Lily holding Nathan's hand on museum stairs without thinking about it. About the Tuesday evening in the kitchen with the cabinet hardware on the counter, him sitting down at the table saying, "What does she need?" I would say, Victoria answered carefully, that the people in my daughter's life have shown her what it looks like when someone chooses to show up, consistently, without obligation and without condition. And yes, she paused, I think that has influenced her understanding of what that looks like. I hope it has. Wells had no further questions. The judge delivered the ruling on a Friday morning. Victoria and Miriam sat at the plaintiff's table. Damien and Wells sat at theirs. The courtroom was quieter than it had been all week, with the specific silence of people waiting for something that would land with weight. The judge took 11 minutes to deliver her ruling. Victoria didn't move. She kept her hands flat on the table, her breathing even, and listened to each word with the full force of her concentration. Damien's petition for joint physical custody, denied. His request for modification of the support arrangement in his favor, denied. The court's finding regarding the financial disclosure failures during the original divorce proceedings referred to a separate proceeding, meaning Damien's attorneys now had a different problem entirely. Victoria's full physical custody, affirmed. The judge added language to the ruling, language about consistency and stability and the documented record of a primary parent who had provided both reliably for 5 years. She added language about the weight the court gave to continuity of care. She added language about the documented pattern of absence on the part of the petitioner. None of it was dramatic. It was just the law, doing what it occasionally did, which was arrive at the right place. Miriam touched her arm, gently, the signal. Victoria let out one long breath through her nose. Across the courtroom she was aware of Damien standing, of Wells speaking to him in a low voice, of the controlled precision of a man who had just lost a fight he'd been certain of winning. She didn't look at him. She had spent years looking at Damien Cross and seeing things she wished she hadn't, and she was done with that. She was done. In the hallway outside, Miriam shook her hand, formal, brief, the handshake of a professional who had done her job. We'll talk next week about the referral proceeding. That's going to be a separate... Miriam, Victoria stopped her. Thank you. Not professionally, actually. Miriam looked at her. Something passed through her expression that was not quite a smile but lived in the neighborhood. You did the work, she said. I just organized it. Victoria walked out of the courthouse into the November air, cold and flat and ordinary, and stood on the steps for a moment. People moved around her going about their Friday morning, none of them knowing or caring about what had just happened in courtroom 14B. She took her phone out. Nathan had texted at 7:30. I'm here. She typed back, It's over. We won. The reply came in 40 seconds. I know you did. She sat down on the courthouse steps, not caring that she was in a good coat and the steps were cold stone. She sat down and put the phone in her lap and looked at the November sky, gray and even and without drama, and allowed herself for approximately 3 minutes to not be managing anything, just sitting on steps, just breathing, just done. The city moved around her and she sat in the middle of it, and it had been the longest, hardest summer and fall she could remember in years. And it was over, and Lily was safe, and she was sitting on courthouse steps in a November morning feeling the specific texture of something that was not yet happiness exactly. Happiness was warmer, and she'd get there. But was its necessary predecessor. Relief. Plain and total. After 3 minutes, she stood up, brushed off her coat, and started walking. She had a daughter to go home to. She walked home from the courthouse. It was 4 blocks, which was not a practical walking distance in a good coat on a cold Friday morning when she had a car available and a full afternoon of work waiting. She walked anyway. She needed the cold air and the movement and the ordinary sounds of the city going about its business. The buses, the coffee carts, the people talking on phones and not talking on phones, all of it indifferent and continuous and real. She had spent the last 7 months inside a legal process that had required her to be precise and controlled and strategic at every moment, to manage not just her own emotions but the way her emotions appeared to other people in rooms where her emotional presentation was evidence. She had done it because it was necessary, and because Lily needed her to do it, and because she was, fundamentally, someone who did what was necessary. But walking those 4 blocks in the November cold, she let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened, and what it had cost to get there, and what it meant that it was over. It had cost her a summer. It had cost her months of sleep and concentration and the particular tax of carrying fear quietly. It had cost her sessions with her therapist that she'd left feeling worse than when she arrived, because processing things out loud sometimes made them more real before it made them less. It had cost her the specific grief of sitting in a courtroom and watching a man use her daughter's name 11 times as a performance of love he had never actually demonstrated. But Lily was safe. Lily was hers, documented and legally affirmed and safe. And Nathan was on the other side of a text message that said, "I know you did." She stopped at a corner to wait for the light and looked at the November sky, the same flat gray it had been from the courthouse steps, and thought, this is the part where things get to be different now. The light changed. She crossed. She picked Lily up from school herself that afternoon, which she didn't always manage on Fridays. Lily came out of the building in her coat and her backpack and a paper crown she'd apparently made in art class, slightly crooked, with her name spelled correctly across the front in purple marker because Lily had strong opinions about spelling her own name. "Mommy, look," she said, pointing to the crown. "I see it. Very regal. I'm a queen today." Lily took her hand and they walked toward the car. "Emma says queens have responsibilities." Emma is correct. "I have responsibility for Gerald's kingdom." She said it with the full gravity it deserved. "It's a lot." "I imagine it is." Lily climbed in the car and buckled herself, a thing she'd recently decided she could do without help, and that still took approximately 45 seconds longer than it looked like it would. Victoria waited. Lily got it. "Mommy?" she said as the car pulled out. "Yeah, baby." "Is something different today?" Victoria looked at her daughter in the rearview mirror. The crooked paper crown, the dark eyes that were too perceptive by half for a 5-year-old. She'd been doing this for years, arriving at the correct emotional temperature of a room without being told what the room was. "Something is finished," Victoria said. "Something that's been taking up a lot of space. And now it's done." Lily considered this with the seriousness she gave important information. "Is that good?" "Yes," Victoria said. "That's good." Lily nodded and looked out the window. "Okay," she said, satisfied, and then, "Can we have pancakes for dinner?" "Pancakes or breakfast?" "They have eggs. Eggs or dinner." "That's genuinely not the argument you think it is." "I think it's a good argument." "I know you do." They had pancakes for dinner. Victoria made them, which meant they were slightly uneven, and one of them was more brown than it needed to be. And Lily ate 3 of them without complaint, which was its own kind of victory. She called Nathan that evening after Lily was in bed. He picked up on the first ring, the same way he had when she'd called from the side of the road in October. She'd noticed that, the consistency of it. The first ring, like he kept the phone close when he knew she might call. "How are you?" he asked. "I've been thinking all day about how to answer that." She was sitting in the kitchen with tea she'd made and not drunk. I think I'm relieved in a way that hasn't fully registered yet, like the body is still running on the chemistry of the last 7 months and hasn't gotten the message that it can stop." "That makes sense," he said. "It takes a while." "Have you felt that?" A pause. "After Amy died," he said, "for about a year I kept waking up at 3 in the morning. Not because of dreams, just waking up. Because that was what I'd been doing for the 6 months she was sick, and it took a long time for my body to understand that the emergency was over." A brief silence. "You were running on emergency mode for a long time." She thought about that. "Yes. It gets quieter," he said. "It just takes a little while." She looked at the tea cooling in her mug. "Nathan, I want to say something, and I want to say it clearly because I didn't say it clearly enough in October on the road. I said it, and then we had to deal with the tow truck and Lily and the drive home, and I don't think Victoria, let me finish." She took a breath. "I love you. I've loved you for a while. I know I wasn't easy to be with this year. I know I held you at a distance when you were trying to help, and I made decisions for you that weren't mine to make, and I protected myself in ways that probably looked like I didn't trust you, and I did trust you. I didn't fully trust the situation, or myself in it." She stopped. "I'm trying to say that I'm done doing that. I'm trying to say I'm here." The line was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. "Same as October." But then he added, "I've been here too. I'm not going anywhere." A pause. "You know that by now." "I know that by now," she agreed. "Good." His voice shifted, not emotional exactly, more settled, like something that had been slightly off-center had moved back to where it was supposed to be. "Can I take you and Lily to dinner tomorrow? Somewhere nice. Not a celebration exactly, just I want to sit across from you somewhere and not be managing anything." She felt something loosen in her chest. "Yes," she said. "I would like that very much." They talked for another half hour about nothing. His week at the site, Emma's latest territorial update from the imaginary country, a plumbing issue Gary had handled on a commercial project that had turned into a Gary story, which were their own category of story. She laughed twice. Real laughing, the kind that was its own surprise. She went to bed at 11 and slept until 7, straight through, for the first time since May. The dinner was good, not perfect. The restaurant was slightly too loud, and Lily spilled water within the first 10 minutes and had strong opinions about the breadbasket that required diplomatic management, but good in the way that things were good when they were real rather than performed. Nathan wore a jacket that was slightly better than his usual, and had clearly made an effort with it, and the effort was visible and endearing. Emma came too, because it seemed wrong to exclude her, and she and Lily arrived at the restaurant already deep in a conversation about the constitutional crisis that had apparently resolved itself through a horse-mediated peace treaty, the details of which were elaborate and internally consistent. Nathan looked at Victoria across the table while the girls negotiated the terms of the treaty and said, "Do you think they know it's not real?" "I think the question assumes that real and not real are more distinct than they actually are." He thought about this. "That's either very profound or you're just covering for them." "Probably both." Emma and Lily ordered the same thing, which they'd been doing lately without coordinating it, some unconscious synchronization that Victoria found both sweet and slightly eerie. Nathan ordered the steak, same as he had in the cafe a year ago, which she remembered, and he probably didn't. She looked at him over the table, the restaurant noise around them. Her daughter explaining something about border politics to his daughter with the patience of a career diplomat. The breadbasket that Lily had already substantially damaged. This was her life, not the version she'd planned, not the version she'd been trying to rebuild after the marriage. The careful, self-sufficient version with its managed schedule and its high walls and its very good armor. This version was noisier and less controlled and required her to be more permeable to other people's needs and moods and schedules than she'd learned to allow herself to be. She found she didn't mind. That was the thing she hadn't expected. Not just tolerating the noise, not minding it, finding it, if she was honest, the best part. December came with the particular combination of cold and light that cities wore in December. The storefronts and the early dark, and the general feeling that time was moving in a slightly different register, slower and more deliberate, weighted with retrospection. Victoria stood in it and felt the year behind her like terrain she'd crossed. The legal fight and the depositions and the courthouse and the October road and the 7 months of managed fear. All of it behind her now, receding. She had a conversation with her therapist in December that she kept thinking about afterward. She'd been describing the year, not for the first time they'd covered much of it in real time, but describing it from the distance of a few weeks, looking back at it from where she now was. "What's different?" her therapist had asked. "From who you were a year ago?" Victoria had thought about it carefully, the way she thought about things she wanted to get right. "I'm less afraid of needing things," she said finally. "I spent a long time. I built myself into someone who didn't need things because needing things was what Damien used against me. He found the things I needed and made me feel weak for needing them. So I stopped." She paused. "And then Nathan needed nothing from me that I didn't want to give. And Lily needs things constantly and unself-consciously, the way children do, and she doesn't apologize for it, and she's the most functional person I know." She looked at her hands. "I think I learned from both of them that needing isn't the exposure I thought it was." Her therapist said, "Do you trust that now, or do you still check?" "I still check," Victoria said honestly. "I probably always will, but the checking it's not the same anymore. It doesn't feel like bracing for impact. It feels more like making sure the foundation is still solid. And it always is. The foundation being Nathan," she said, "the girls, Miriam, who I've added to the short list of people I trust unreservedly. Priya." She paused. "Myself. My own judgment. That took longer." Her therapist wrote something. "Trusting your own judgment. I second-guessed myself for years. Every decision I made in the marriage, every choice I made coming out of it. I kept looking for the thing I must have missed, the sign I should have read." She looked out the window at the December street. "I think what I've stopped doing is holding myself responsible for Damien's choices. He did what he did. I didn't cause it. I just lived adjacent to it for a while and then got out. And Nathan?" She almost smiled. "Nathan is not a system I need to decode. He does what he says and says what he does. That's it." She paused. "It's a remarkably uncomplicated thing that I managed to make extremely complicated for approximately a year." "Most people do," her therapist said. Christmas that year was different from every Christmas in recent memory. She still went to her mother's in Connecticut because that was not optional and also, with distance, not unpleasant. Her mother had the quality of someone who had long since decided to love the situation as it actually was, rather than as she'd planned for it, and that made her genuinely easy to be with in small doses. Lily got overwhelmed and gleeful with cousins. Gerald had apparently been promoted to Duke Emeritus in absentia, a development the cousins were briefed on extensively. But this year, on the 26th, Nathan and Emma drove up. It hadn't been planned exactly. It had evolved the way things between them evolved. Not decided, but arrived at, both of them finding their way to the same place without mapping it in advance. His in-laws were in Florida this Christmas, and Emma had asked if they could see Lily, and Nathan had mentioned it to Victoria without pressure, and Victoria had mentioned it to her mother, who had said, with the specific brightness she used when she was pleased about something and trying not to show it, that of course they should come. There was plenty of room. So Nathan and Emma came on the 26th. Emma and Lily disappeared immediately into whatever corner of the house had been designated as the operational territory of the imaginary country, which had apparently entered a period of reconstruction following the horse-mediated peace treaty. Nathan met Victoria's mother, who looked at him for approximately 30 seconds, and then said to Victoria in the kitchen, later, "He has good hands." Victoria looked at her. "That's your assessment. Hands tell you things, her mother said, without elaboration, and went back to the cookies she was making. Victoria didn't know entirely what to do with that, so she left it. The 26th was the kind of day that accumulated without event. Lunch, the children's noise in the other room, a walk in the cold that Nathan and Victoria took while the girls stayed inside arguing about city planning with their cousins. They walked through her mother's neighborhood, the bare trees and the frozen grass, and the quiet of a post-Christmas suburb, and talked about the year the way people talked about things that were finally far enough away to look at directly. "Do you think he'll come back?" Nathan asked. "He didn't say Damien's name. He didn't need to." "Not the same way," Victoria said. "The referral proceeding is going to cost him. His attorneys are going to be very focused on that for a while." She put her hands in her pockets. "And he learned something. I think he believed when he filed that I would settle, that it would be the same as every other thing, that I would calculate the cost and decide the settlement was cheaper." She paused. "He was wrong about that. He underestimated you. People do." She said it without bitterness. "I used to try to correct it. Now I find it occasionally useful." Nathan laughed, the sound of it in the cold, quiet street. She'd never gotten tired of his laugh, the way it was always slightly surprised by itself, like he forgot he was capable of finding things funny and was reminded periodically. "Emma asked me something," he said after a moment. She looked at him. "She asked if you and Lily were going to live with us." He said it carefully, not steering toward or away from anything. "I didn't know what to tell her." They walked a few steps in silence. "What did you tell her?" Victoria asked. "I told her I didn't know yet, that it was something the grown-ups were figuring out." He paused. "Is that something the grown-ups are figuring out?" She thought about her townhouse, about Nathan's house, which she'd been to enough times now to know it. The way it was organized around practicality rather than aesthetics, the Emma-sized chaos of the upstairs, the kitchen that was slightly too small but worked because Nathan was efficient about it. She thought about Saturday mornings and the two separate households converging and separating and the logistics of that, which she'd been not thinking about with some deliberateness for a while. "It's something the grown-ups should probably start figuring out," she said. He nodded once, not pressing for more than that. She appreciated it and also recognized it as a Nathan Reed specialty, the willingness to let a thing be the size it actually was rather than the size someone was anxious to make it. "Okay," he said. They turned back toward the house. The cold was the kind that made everything clear, outlines sharp, sounds carrying farther than usual. She could hear the girls somewhere inside, a burst of laughter from the second floor. She thought about the year, about where she'd been a year ago, a cafe, a table, a man who said words that landed on her daughter like stones, about what she'd thought her life was and what she'd found it could be instead. She hadn't planned Nathan. She hadn't planned any of this. She'd been building towards something controlled and self-sufficient and safe, and instead she'd gotten this, complicated and loud and imperfect and real. She reached for his hand, not dramatically, just found it with hers and held it, walking back through the cold December street toward the house where her daughter was laughing. He held it back, which was all she'd been asking for, in the end. Someone to hold on. January arrived, and with it a conversation she'd been not having with herself for a while. She sat at her kitchen table one morning, a Tuesday, early, before Lily was up, with coffee and the particular quiet of a house before it woke, and thought honestly about what she wanted. Not what was strategically correct, not what minimized risk. What she actually wanted, which was a question she'd been bad at for years and was trying to get better at. She wanted to not do the parallel household thing indefinitely. She wanted Saturday mornings to not require logistics. She wanted Emma and Lily to stop saying goodbye at the end of weekends with the specific expression children wore when they knew they weren't going to see each other for 5 days, and 5 days was a long time when you were 7 and 5. She wanted Nathan's hands on her kitchen counter on a Tuesday morning, not just a Saturday. She wanted the ordinary, continuous presence of a person rather than the managed schedule of proximity. She realized, sitting with her coffee at 6:30 in the January dark, a life that was actually assembled rather than carefully coordinated. The question was whether she could let herself have it. She thought about what she'd told her therapist, I'm less afraid of needing things. And I still check. She checked now. She held the thing up to the light and looked at it. The fear underneath the want. The old reflex that said, "This is too much. You will pay for this. Things that are this good cost you something you don't see coming." She looked at it, and then she set it down. Not because she'd stopped being afraid, because she'd decided the fear was not the authority on the question. She picked up her phone and called Nathan. He answered on the first ring. "It's early," he said. She could hear that he was awake, though, the slightly alert quality of someone already moving around. "I know, I wanted to ask you something before I talked myself out of asking." A brief pause. "Okay." "The house question," she said, "that Emma asked." She heard him set something down, full attention. "Yeah. I don't want to do the logistics anymore," she said. I want to figure out the actual thing, whether that's one house or a different arrangement or something I haven't thought of, but I want to stop managing the distance and start managing the reality." A silence that was not uncomfortable. The kind of silence where someone was doing something real with what you'd said. "My lease on the business space is up in March," he said. "I've been thinking about a different office setup anyway. And the girls' school situation. Emma's school is 20 minutes from Lily's. That's workable." He paused. "I'm not saying I've been planning this." "But you've been thinking about it." "I think about practical things," he said. "It's a reflex." She almost smiled. "I know." "What do you want?" he asked. Direct, the way he was always direct. Not the logistics. What do you actually want? She sat with the question, with the January kitchen and the coffee and the quiet of the house about to wake up. "I want you here," she said. "Not visiting, here." The line was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said. Simple as that. "Okay." Not making it into a production, not performing the magnitude of the moment, just, "Okay, I hear you." Yes. It was, she thought, the most Nathan Reed sentence in the history of Nathan Reed sentences. "Okay," and she said back, "Isham." The spring took its time arriving the way springs in the city always did. Tentative, then committed, then fully itself by April. The logistics of the actual transition were exactly as complicated as logistics always were, and nothing Nathan couldn't handle on the practical end, and nothing Victoria couldn't navigate on the organizational end. And together they were, it turned out, reasonably good at solving concrete problems when they weren't also managing a court case. Emma moved into the room that had been the guest room and painted it a dark green she'd selected herself, which was a surprising choice that turned out to look excellent. She kept a detailed map of the imaginary country pinned above her desk, annotated and color-coded. Gerald lived on the bookshelf. Lily explained that this was Gerald's city house, as opposed to Gerald's country estate, which existed somewhere abstract that required no physical representation. Nathan's tools lived in the garage, his truck in the driveway, his coffee mug on the second shelf of the cabinet, because that was where it went, because he was tall enough to reach it. These were small things. She kept noticing them, the accumulation of small things that made a house a household, the way you learned where someone's things went, the way their presence reorganized the physical space around itself, the way 4 people eating dinner made a sound that 3 people eating dinner didn't. Lily adjusted with the straightforward adaptability of a child who had never been given reason to distrust the adults around her, which was, Victoria thought, the most important thing the last 5 years had actually built. Not the company, or the legal victory, or any of the things she'd worked consciously toward. Just a child who moved through the world without flinching, who reached for Nathan's hand when she needed steadying and didn't think twice about it. Emma adjusted with slightly more deliberateness. She was 7. Old enough to be aware that something significant was changing, thoughtful enough to need time to organize it. She had a week in March where she was quieter than usual, and Nathan said she was working something out and gave her the space to do it. Then she came to breakfast on a Thursday morning and sat down and announced that she'd decided the new house arrangement was better than the old one because the kitchen was bigger, and that was the end of her processing period. Victoria told Nathan this story, Emma's Thursday morning announcement, and he shook his head the way he shook his head when Emma did something that was entirely Emma. "She decided," he said. "She decided. And that's it. For her, once she decides. I noticed. He looked at Victoria. She's going to terrify her colleagues when she's 40. She and Lily both, Victoria said. We should probably apologize to the future in advance. The anniversary of the cafe was in November. She hadn't been tracking it exactly. She'd been aware of it the way you were aware of certain dates, not marking it on a calendar, but carrying it somewhere in the background. The anniversary of the night when a man had pushed back a chair and said words that had shattered something in her daughter's face, and a stranger had walked across a cafe and sat down. Nathan brought it up first, which surprised her. They were in the kitchen on a Saturday morning, the specific Saturday morning that was closest to the actual date. Emma and Lily still asleep upstairs in the chaotic sleep of children who'd stayed up too late on a Friday. Nathan was making pancakes. He was always making pancakes. The kitchen smelled like butter and coffee and November morning. It's been a year, he said. She looked up from her phone. Since? Since the cafe. He turned a pancake. Since I sat at your table uninvited. She set her phone down. It has. He was quiet for a moment. She watched his profile. The concentration of the pancake, the set of his jaw, the hands she'd looked at 100 times now and still found something in. Strong hands. Her mother had said, hands tell you things. I've been thinking about it, he said. About that night. What about it? He turned off the burner, set the spatula down, turned around. She knew from the way he turned around, fully, deliberately, with the specific quality of presence he had when something mattered, that this was a different conversation than the one they'd been having. I've been thinking about what I want, he said, which is something I've been not saying for a while. Because you needed time, and I understood that, and I'm not sorry I waited. He paused. But it's been a year. She looked at him. I want to marry you, he said. Plain as that. Not a performance, not rehearsed, just a true sentence delivered directly. I want Lily to have the thing she called it, our house, officially. I want Emma to have a mother who is actually not a title, a person. Someone who makes the calls and shows up to the events and is there when I can't be. He paused. And I want you to stop wondering whether I mean it, because I've been meaning it since approximately February of last year, and I think on some level you've known, and I'm done waiting for the right moment, because I figured out there isn't one. The kitchen was very quiet. The butter was still warm on the pancakes. The coffee maker had finished its cycle. Somewhere upstairs she could hear the distant sound of Lily talking to Gerald in her sleep, which was a thing Lily did that Victoria found both concerning and extremely characteristic. She looked at Nathan. She thought about the year, about the cafe and the courthouse and the October road and the December walk and the January kitchen before anyone was awake. She thought about the armor she'd built and the cost of wearing it and the specific relief of having found someone who waited for her to set it down rather than demanding she remove it on a schedule. She thought about being afraid, and being afraid anyway, and doing the thing regardless. Yes, she said. He looked at her. You didn't ask yet, she said. I know, I'm telling you in advance. Something moved through his expression, the unhidden kind, the kind that happened to him rather than being placed there. He crossed the kitchen, took her face in both hands, looked at her for a moment in that way he had of seeing her without requiring her to be different than she was. Then he kissed her, which was also not a performance. When he pulled back, she said, "The pancakes are getting cold." "The pancakes can wait." "They can't, actually. You know they can't." He laughed. She felt it against her forehead. "You're impossible," he said. "You knew that in the cafe." "I did," he agreed. "I sat down anyway." Hotset. He proposed properly that evening at the cafe. Not with a plan, not a reservation or a speech or a ring presentation that had been choreographed. He told her where he wanted to go, and she'd known why, and they'd gotten a sitter for the girls and gone. And they were seated at the corner table, near the fireplace, which was lit against the November cold. The cafe was the same and not the same. It had the same mismatched chairs and handwritten menu boards and the smell of coffee and something baked. But it was a year later, and she was not the same woman who had sat here the first time. And the man across from her was not a stranger. He put a ring on the table between them, not a box. Just the ring itself, set on the tablecloth, so small and understated, A single stone in a simple setting, the kind of thing you wore every day without worrying about it. She recognized this as deliberate. He had paid attention to who she was. "I did have a speech," he said. "I wrote it. I decided it was terrible." What was wrong with it? It sounded like I was trying to sound good. He looked at the ring and then at her. "You know what I want to say. You know what this year was. You were there for all of it." She did know. She'd been there. She picked up the ring. It fit. She didn't ask how he knew. See, she suspected Emma, who had her father's attention to practical detail. "Ask me anyway," she said. He looked at her. "Victoria, will you marry me?" No question mark exactly. More like a statement he wanted her to confirm. "Yes," she said, for the second time today. "I told you." "I know," he said. "I wanted to hear it here." She looked around the cafe, the fireplace, the table. A year ago, she'd been humiliated at this table in front of her daughter, and she'd sat with the wreckage of it, and a man had walked across the room and asked one simple question. "Can I sit with you two?" She'd thought, at the time, that it was a small kindness. The random decency of a stranger who couldn't watch something bad happen without doing something about it. She hadn't known it was the beginning of something. You never knew, in the moment, what the beginning looked like. She put the ring on, looked at it on her hand, then looked at Nathan across the table, in the cafe where all of this had started, in the November that was nothing like last November. "We should call the girls," she said. "They already know," he said. She looked at him. "Emma." "Emma," he confirmed. "Of course." He flagged the waitress and ordered dessert, which they hadn't done last November. Last November she'd been too shattered for dessert, and he'd been too careful to suggest it. They ordered the chocolate cake, which arrived in 2 pieces and was very good, and they sat at the corner table by the fireplace and ate it, and the cafe moved around them with its ordinary Friday night business, none of it knowing or caring about the specific geography of the table it happened near. But she knew. She would always know. The wedding was the following June. She had not wanted a big production, and Nathan had not wanted a big production, and the two of them had discovered in the process of planning that this was one of many areas in which their preferences were almost identically specific, which Priya said was either very good or would eventually become its own problem, and which Victoria chose to interpret as very good. It was a garden ceremony in a house outside the city that belonged to a friend of Victoria's mother, big enough, open enough, with a June afternoon that was warm without being punishing. 37 people, which was more than Nathan would have chosen and fewer than Victoria's industry contacts would have populated if left to their own devices, and the compromise was comfortable. Lily was flower girl. She had been planning this role since November and had strong opinions about the execution, which Emma, in her self-appointed role as organizational authority, had been helping her refine. The petal situation had been discussed at length. The dress was agreed upon after 3 rounds of deliberation. The pace of walking was practiced. On the morning of the wedding, Lily came to Victoria's room while the hairdresser was still finishing and sat on the bed and watched with the focused attention she gave things she considered important. "Mommy," she said. After today, Nathan is my daddy?" Victoria looked at her daughter in the mirror. The star sweater had finally been retired. It had lasted nearly 2 years and been washed into a softness that had changed its character. But Lily was wearing something purple today, because some things didn't change. "He's Nathan," Victoria said carefully. "He'll be Nathan. But yes, he's going to be the person who is there, every day, like a daddy is." Lily processed this with her characteristic gravity. "Like he already is," she said. Victoria held her daughter's gaze in the mirror. "Like he already is," she agreed. Lily nodded, satisfied. The question settled. She picked up Gerald from the nightstand. Gerald had a wedding outfit, which was a small ribbon around his neck that Emma had tied, and went to find Emma to make final petal preparations. Victoria sat for a moment longer at the mirror. She thought about the woman who had sat in the back of a black SUV a year and a half ago, watching rain streak down the window, trying to convince herself that going to dinner was a reasonable choice, who had built walls so carefully she'd started to believe the walls were protection rather than isolation, who had loved her daughter fiercely and completely and had still, underneath all of it, been alone in a way that had no name she was willing to use. That woman had not disappeared. She was still in there, the wariness and the self-sufficiency and the reflex to check whether kindness was costing her something. You didn't unlearn years of earned caution by falling in love. You didn't become a different person because someone showed up, but you could become a larger version of the person you were. You could make room. You could let the walls stand where they stood and still open the door. She looked at the ring on her hand. She stood up. The ceremony was short, which they'd both wanted. Their vows were simple. Nathan looked at her when he said his, not performing it, not consulting the note card he'd brought and ultimately didn't use, just looked at her with the direct, unhurried attention that was the thing she'd loved first without knowing it was love. He said, "I'm not going to tell you I'll be perfect. I already know I won't, but I'll be here, every day, without condition. That's what I can promise you. That's the whole thing." She said, "I spent a long time learning not to need things from people. You spent a year quietly being the thing I needed anyway. I don't know how to say what that means, except that I'm done keeping the distance. This is me, with no distance, for as long as you want it." Lily threw petals with complete commitment and approximately zero restraint, which meant she ran out halfway down the aisle and had to continue without petals, which she did with undiminished purpose. Emma stood beside Nathan at the ceremony, which had not been formally designated but had simply happened. Emma had positioned herself there, and no one had suggested she stand anywhere else, because she was exactly where she should be. When the officiant said, "You may kiss," Nathan kissed her, and the small gathering made the sound small gatherings made, and Lily said, loudly, from the front row, "Finally!" There was laughter, real laughter, the kind that lived in rooms for a while after the sound stopped. The reception ran into the evening, and the evening turned gold and then dark, and the garden lights came on, and the children, Emma and Lily and a scatter of cousins, ran in the way children ran when they'd been waiting all day to run. Nathan danced with Victoria in the way people danced when they were not particularly good dancers and were comfortable with that, which was its own kind of joy. Gary gave a toast that started well, and then went approximately 3 minutes longer than necessary, and somehow ended on a story about load-bearing walls that was actually incomprehensibly perfect. Priya gave a toast that was 12 sentences, precisely correct, and made Victoria's mother cry. Late in the evening, when the food was done and the music had slowed and the children had collapsed in various chairs and laps, with the complete surrender of the truly exhausted, Victoria stood at the edge of the garden and looked at the lit tables and the people who mattered to her, assembled in the same space. Nathan came and stood beside her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She looked at the garden. Lily asleep across 2 chairs with her head in Emma's lap, Emma still awake and doing something with her hands that was probably related to the imaginary country's constitutional documents. Her mother talking to Gary, which was a conversation Victoria had not predicted and was slightly afraid to examine. Priya checking her phone with the efficiency of someone who had not fully turned off even today, which was just who Priya was. "I'm thinking that none of this was the plan," she said. "Any of it. Was the plan better?" She thought about the plan. The managed life, the careful schedule, the walls. The version of the future she'd been building before November of last year. "No," she said. "Not even close." He put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into it, not because she couldn't stand without it, but because she could and chose not to. That was the difference, she'd learned, between needing and choosing, between dependency and love. Lily shifted in her sleep and murmured something. Gerald fell off the chair onto the grass. Emma retrieved him without waking Lily, which was its own kind of small grace. Victoria watched her daughters. That was what they were. Hers. Both of them. The one she'd grown and the one she'd been given. Both asleep in a June garden, both belonging to the same life. She thought about the cafe, about am I baggage, about the question that had landed on her daughter's face like something dropped from a height, and what it had cost her daughter to ask it, and what it had cost her to hear it. She thought about what the answer had turned out to be. Not baggage, never baggage. The main thing, the way Nathan had said it once, flat and certain, in a kitchen a year ago. She's not baggage, she's the main thing. And here they were. Come on, Nathan said. Someone's going to step on Gerald if he stays on the ground. She laughed, and they walked back into the garden, back to the lit tables and the sleeping children and the people they loved, and the night held them, and it was imperfect and real and entirely, completely theirs.